torches carried on by the last American vagabond.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Monday, November 25th, 2024. Thank you for bearing with me there to start. I don't know why I still take so much effort to make sure we have a YouTube channel going, but YouTube continues to try to stop what we're doing on their platforms. But since we start like this, for those that don't know, we've been censored on damn near every platform, everywhere you could talk about, and that's kind of hyperbolic, but not really. And YouTube being one of the places that's kicked us off many, many times. We started doing pirate channels where we ask you guys out there, which since you're listening now, and if you'd like to take part in what we call our pirate streams, not necessarily the same as Pirate Stream Media, which is another podcast that we started, but same thing, we use them on that channel. We broadcast on YouTube using our pirate stream, or like a pirate radio, or like the Matrix signal, where we have you guys let us broadcast through your channels. Now, obviously know that comes along with the possibility you could get censored on Google platforms like TLAV in general. I can't even start these accounts without using somebody else's platform or somebody else's login information. The reason that took me a minute to get started, for those that are seeing this live, something happened. They pulled the channel right away. So I just had to take a moment in the background to kind of get another channel up. And so we shifted to new channels, and that's where you're watching now if you're watching on YouTube. And so thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to go through a lot to talk about today. I'm going to address what happened just day before yesterday with our website, which seemed that it started out seeming like some major censorship action. It doesn't appear that's what happened. We'll go into the details, let you know for yourself, but ultimately it comes down to what the new host we have is telling us. But at the end of the day, it's important for you guys to see, I think, where this goes in every context. Censorship is increasing, the technocratic level of it. The point is to see the choke points in all of this and how easy it is for these things to be yanked. I've been asking for a long time. How long until it gets to the domain name, the hosting level? We've seen very few of those happen. And I don't believe that's what this was. And the point is that I think we see there where this is going. And that's obviously why we should be very vigilant about what we see happening. That we're gonna start with one point actually that I just randomly added before. It's an important story I've seen. Let's put it this way. It's a smaller story in the things that we usually cover. But for some reason, this just stood out to me, and I'm going to use it to make a larger point. But we're going to start there, and then we're going to go into censorship and ultimately what happened the day before yesterday and how the larger point of censorship and what's going on Twitter. We're going to talk about Max Egan, Eunice Tarawi, and different accounts that have been struggling through something very strange in regard to their follower account. They're being censored, being brought back, having their accounts being removed, or their followers being removed, and it's really weird. And so I'll have to show you what that is. And if you saw the last show we did, you already saw an example of that. But it seems to have been corrected, at least slightly. I think that's because of people reaching out, which is not something everybody has the luxury of, to have people on their followers, reach out and make us think about it. We're also going to talk about, which is a good thing, and I'm glad they're doing that, but not everybody has that. We're going to talk about a follow-up on Authentics we mentioned in the last show, which I think is very important. One of the main things I want to get into today, and I don't even know how to articulate this to start. You'll see what I see in this, at least as we get into it. That's the main part about the barring from agencies part of the title. Now, the actual exact title from, I think it's Politico, Trump team barred from agencies amid legal standoff. Now, it's exactly what's happening, but there's more to it. If I could have made it the longer title to add more to it, the point is that it seems, at least at the moment, they're being held back from accessing anything but public information, at least. And this is all just on paper, or rather what's being publicly said to us. That's important to think about because, I'm of the mind there's more one government dynamic than more so left-right fighting Nonetheless, there's still different things that we don't know, people acting individually. The point, though, is that this is at least what we're being told. And not only is that interesting as it relates to the foreign policy points I keep bringing up, the supposed peace deal that they're working with Ukraine behind the scenes, it's very concerning, as well as this limbo they're in, sort of allowing donations from foreign entities without any transparency within that, which is very relevant to, seems to be the large backer to Trump and what that means and to what they have access to right now. It's a really interesting overlap that is more questions than answers, but I want to make sure we go through it so you see, at least what I feel this is showing us. Come to your own conclusions about it. We'll talk more about Trump's teams, the picks, the continuing sort of awareness of the problem from the conservative side of the conversation. And we're going to get into some bigger points around the Israel, Gaza, Lebanon conversation, the fake ceasefire. That's what I used for the image today. It's like everything else in this conversation. The evidence is there. Every news headline from every platform, including Israeli media, will tell you Netanyahu's been systematically foiling all of these talks from the beginning. It's very clear. All the evidence is there. Their own people call it out. But yet some weird bubble inside the Western media, Western world, we act like it's not true. And if you dare say it, you're racist, even though it's very easily provably the case. And everyone seems to know it, except these people that I think also know that but don't care and are being influenced, paid, bribed, blackmailed in some way to get you to pretend that's not the case. It's shocking. It's really crazy because of how many people are suffering through it, using your name to do it. They know you can see it. And I guess they're just hoping that you care more about team sport politics than you do about human life and what's true. I'd like to believe that's not the case. In fact, I'll say I know that's not the case for the majority. That's what my heart tells me. That's what my eyes tell me, but it's hard to tell. But a couple other points we'll get into in regard to something we mentioned briefly about in that same conversation, the blocking of aid, but working with ISIS-affiliated groups that I argue are being, what the bottom line is, an Israel government working through these groups. So how that makes sense to you, why they might be there, whether that's organic or whether that's being placed there, whether that's been, who knows? The point is that this is what Israel chooses to work with in Gaza. And this is reported by Haaretz. And that should be very interesting in the context of what that means, the context of the larger conversation. Is Hamas ISIS? If that's the case, then why are they working with an ISIS-backed group to go after Hamas? It doesn't make sense until you realize that most of what Israel tells you about Hamas, Gaza, their entire origin is all false. It's built on lies, and it's all falling apart in front of us right now. So I want to start with this interesting story that really did stand out to me, and just simply, I guess, because of how random it was and how I think it just speaks to some larger, that there is something always going on. There's, I think I said this the other day, that we don't live in the world we think we do. And it doesn't mean everything, but it means that there's an entire structure behind everything that is the real structure. And whether that's about just corruption and power, or the intelligence agencies and what they're ultimately operate, there's just this, we live in this construct where we pretend like we're, whether it's our government or our party fighting for good and freedom and noble, righteous causes, and they'd only do this for the means to an end for positive, and I'd like to believe that some people actually feel that way. I know that most people do. That's why they pretend to do those things. But I guess my larger point is just that there's, what you're going to see here is an indication of something that I think just shows where people bump up against that and never get seen again, or the story rapidly disappears, and we just nobody anywhere, including investigation. What's the word I'm looking for? Authorities choose to go further. The government. You'll see what I mean as we go through this. Maybe I'm making too much out of this, but I just find this to be a strange story that was worthy of pointing out anyway. Father of missing Hawaii woman found dead in apparent suicide. So the basis of the story, the father is missing. It's a Hawaiian woman, or rather a Hawaiian woman, Ryan Kobayashi. The father of her, Ryan Kobayashi, died after an apparent suicide. The only reason they say it's a suicide is because they found him at the bottom of a cliff. Now, it says the 58-year-old father had been apparently searching for his daughter, 38-year-old Hannah Kobayashi, after she went missing. She missed her connected flight between New York and LAX. Hannah was supposed to meet with family on November 8th, according to her family. Kobayashi died after he jumped off a parking structure near LAX sometime around 4 a.m. on Sunday, which this was posted on the 24th, yesterday. It says he died after jumping off of an apartment complex, or a parking structure. Quote, after tirelessly searching throughout Los Angeles for 13 days, and so she's from Hawaii. he took his own life, they say, which I guess is certainly possible. Which I don't even have necessarily any reason to say that's not the case. But doesn't this just seem strange? A vigil was held outside of crypto.com arena, apparently, for her, who is still missing. And again, what it says is on November 11th, the family members say they received strange text messages from Hannah about someone trying to steal her identity. All calls that day went right to voicemail. They'd never heard from her again. The father goes out to try to find her and kills himself off a cliff 13 days into it. I mean, I guess. Of course, I mean, to be very objective, of course, the point is that father could have just got, maybe he found something he didn't like. Maybe there's big more to the story. Maybe it all was made up and it was something darker. Maybe he just got upset, couldn't find her. But based on how much information is being shown, and it seems to me like this guy's going to look for his daughter who randomly went missing after claiming something was going on with her, and then he dies randomly. I'm willing to bet you this story never goes anywhere else. And that's not because, maybe there's someone out there trying to investigate, but I just get the sense from this, and this is completely my opinion, that this is the kind of thing that happens out there. And this is more of my point. The story was meant to lead to something that, that we brush up against things like suddenly maybe she got caught up in something. Maybe she was being used by somebody. Maybe she was an asset for something. And the point is that you brush up against those things and this kind of thing happens. You get, Clinton suicided, as if you will. Never heard from again. And the story gets brushed away. Gary Webb shot himself in the head twice. We all know that's not true, guys. We all know that's not true. Gary Webb did not shoot himself in the head twice. That's stupid. That's literally the story. Or the doctor we talked about just from in Haiti, the Clinton Foundation doctor, not that worked in Haiti, is supposed to be working alongside them and was screaming about what they were stealing, what they were doing. People in the hospitals with maggots on their wounds because they're claiming they're sending billions of dollars, who apparently stabs himself in the chest with a butcher knife, which we all know is not what happened. And it's incredible how this works. So I just wanted you to think about that as we go through a lot of this stuff today, that there is a level of this, whether it's, around the Trump administration, around Zionism, around the Israeli government, around the deep state, which is ultimately in line with pretty much everybody politically we're talking about. Just ask yourself, or rather realize that there's a lot that we don't know. Make it simple. There's a lot that we don't know that influences their choices, which in the same way you could use that to give them a pass and be like, well, there's pressure we don't know of. That's fair. But just consider that. We all love to think, oh, well, he said this. He promised that. He said all the right words at that little setting over there. Historically, these things never actually come to pass the way they say they do. There's always something that shifts or changes. And it's really about keeping you always on the precipice of thinking, well, they're just about to do it, and we got to fight a little harder, vote a little bit more next time, and we'll get the crumb that we want when really the pie is what we're looking at. That's what this is about. And I think all of this shows us that there is something, not that story itself, but the larger point, that there's a world out there that we don't really exist in. And they want you to think you're involved. The truth is that you're just a passive observer of the shadows in the cave. So let's go to one of the starting points here for the censorship aspect. Now, this is what we put out on, this was the 24th. So I was very, very unnerved by this, especially since we were already having an incredible amount of censorship in a lot of different platforms. And on top of this, right around this time frame, what was it else we were just dealing with at that time? Oh, it was, the restream thing, we just shut us down midstream. There's so many things like that just leave you going. And similar with this, just go, well, I don't know, And so this is what we put out. And this was what was so different. I'd never seen this for some reason, people were confusing this with Twitter. I'm not sure why. It's definitely not. It's a hosting provider, and it says TLAV there, but this was not Twitter or any kind of social media platform. It seems like people just forget websites exist for these platforms. It's like, would you get deleted from Instagram? It's like, no, man, not Instagram. It's not Instagram. But so the point, as I said here, and this is so right immediately, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know why it was down. I was trying to get a hold of my guy. He was rushing to check it out. And so I basically said, we got it back up. At the moment, we didn't know exactly what was happening. I spoke to him the next day. And the bottom line is it came down to, I'll just read what I said, an update. The new host for TLAB site, no longer HostGator, told me that an incorrect setting had caused the site to be suspended despite being paid in full, which not that you guys know this, but that's the one, no matter what, that is one thing that I'm making sure historically, because it's important, that we're always up, usually paying for the full year for these different platforms. And first was GoDaddy and then HostGator. I said, I have no reason to doubt this, and I don't. but it just shows the vulnerability of today. Now, the problem here is that, we don't know, right? I have no reason. This person has done nothing but good by me. And the point is, we don't, at the end of the day, the point is that we always have to end up leaning into something, whether that's an internet provider, whether that is and this is one of the reasons I'm leaning in with people like, I get Hakeem now, formerly Ramiro from Above Phone, as I am so desperate to try to find paths away from these reliances. Whatever that may be. Like, if we could build something in our own house to where we have, that's kind of what I'm trying to angle towards in my life, even though it's very difficult and expensive to do these things. How do we circumvent these choke points? And so at the end of the day, the site's back up. Everything's working fine. It does not seem to be anything other than a mistake. But my point is, I'm here and I have to take at face value what I'm being shown. Right. And so I just think it's important that we recognize that we have to not passively sit and wait for whatever happens next, but try to find paths around this. That's, on a segue or a side note, that's the whole greater people's reset dynamic, right? Not just waiting to see what happens, but trying to actively exit and build our own paths, our own systems and platforms. It's what I, was at least briefly trying to help do with Super U. We're trying to find something else. But on that note, I want to go over some of the other censorship that I see actively happening. And so, the frustrating thing about all this is that this is not over. We all see where this is going. And I think a lot of people in specifically right now, the Trump camp are rightfully so, like we all should be, have hope for the best. But in some cases, let that blind them to what's being put around them right now. Because if it was Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris or somebody with a D next to their name, half of these measures would have been immediately concerning, and they should be, all of them. But because it's somebody that they want to believe has better intentions, and maybe they do, I hope you're right, they tend to miss or ignore or not give them much of a resistance. You should be standing up and resisting and holding them to account and being critical and skeptical of more than anyone, the people you believe in. Because of what we were just talking about, because of the different things that swirl around behind that we don't know about, the different pressures and blackmail and threats. So hold them to account. Let them know that you're watching. So at the very least, if they have to decide, they know that you're going to see them. And I think that influences your choices. But if they know they've got a passive base that's willing to support no matter what they do, that also influences their choices. So here, Yunus Tarawi was originally, and the same thing, we're going to get to Max Egan in a second. He was originally basically like censored and then emptied out his followers. It went down to 0, and then people were following and on top of that. And this person says, Twitter has completely destroyed his account, nearly 200,000 followers removed. And this was on the 24th. Up to yesterday, it was still wonky, or yesterday into today. Now it's as of today, he's saying, thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of my colleagues and fellow journalists and everybody who reached out about this. Here's the Twitter response. And it's saying, thank you for getting in touch with us. Please note that it may take an hour or so for your follower numbers to return to normal. Well, here's what's interesting. This was 7 hours ago. Here's where he's at. Now, it looks like he's gained. So I'm glad that happened. So this essentially went back to normal. But I'm not sure whether that was because people re-followed him or because it repopulated. I'll show you what I mean with Max Egan, which seems to be going in a similar direction. So first of all, it's good that this happened, but I think it's mostly because he has enough influence and people crying foul. You can't do that. That's censorship. And enough people cared. And I think that's usually why this happens. There's a lot of people that never got their accounts back, even from the beginning of all the free speech savior talk. But I'm glad that happened first and foremost, because he deserved. This is a man who's been putting in amazing, unprecedented work when it comes to exposing what's going on in Gaza and Lebanon, mostly Gaza at this point, for what he's been showing on the ground and, looking at their social media accounts, doing amazing work. Now, what I thought was interesting, I want to see if this changed. I looked up the Social Blade, and you can see that then they just minused out 172,000 followers. What's interesting, though, is it doesn't seem to have updated. I wanted to see if that did. Yeah, no, it still shows none, so that's interesting, or they didn't go back. I wonder what that means, because usually this is pretty up to date, like moment to moment. So I wonder why it hasn't shown them back on here. I will show you the other one. I wonder if there's like something different changing the way that this stuff is being, like, I know, and I can see that they're taking actions all over the place to block other things like this from being able to sort of monitor or access, like, blocking out other platforms and not being able to use links and things like that. I think there's more to that, but that's my opinion. Now here is Max Egan. Now this was on the 21st. He said, "Hey, Elon, how come they finally restored his account?" Which, by the way, had been a long time he'd been censored. Nobody was saying anything about it other than people in the independent media. He said, "But removed all my followers." But now that is somewhat back. But I wanted to show you this before it went away. It has been going up since then. But I remember last time I showed you on the show and it was up at like 13 or 14. When I came back, it was at 7. So it's just showing you this weird game that was been going on where some were following and was being removed. Up to 11 now. But here's what it says today, or like right now. Let's update it. So here's what's interesting to me. Well, Yunus Harawi, and I'm glad it happened, got more. I forget what his original number was, but it appears to have gotten more than he started with, which is good, in my opinion. But Max Egan, on the other hand, got restored, and now at the very least you can follow. Well, look, it still doesn't even say I follow. Oh, there it goes. Finally, you can get a follow. Oh no, that disappeared again. See, all accounts are not created equal on this platform. I tell you that right now. At least, see, okay. So clearly something's still going on with his, which I doubt they're ever going to care about. That's my personal opinion. But so let's just say they left it to where you could kind of follow him, and I guess even not still. But at least the number's going up, right? Or not? I don't know. The bottom line, though, is that if it stays like this, well, what about his? He had a large following. Except on his account, which I find interesting. Look at what it says on Social Blade. For to be announced or whatever, or to be determined, TBD. Let's refresh it. Something that's weird to me. Why would this is what I was talking about. There's some kind of boxing out of the data flow. Who knows why his is different? I think we all kind of know, really. It's about specific, people who are critical in certain ways. The point is that if he does, even if they give it back to him and he lets him he lost his following. So is that hey, he got his count back? Well, if you get nixed down to nothing and people have to refollow you, you never really gain that momentum back. Eventually, you'll get back to the place you were at, but that's a huge moment of loss for following, for influence, for reach, for people that wanted to follow you and got pushed away by the platform screaming free speech. So I just think that's really telling. Hopefully he gets it back and hopefully gets his following back, not because people refollow him, but because they give back what they stole from him. Interesting, right? Now, these are just very broad, current examples. If you're of the mind that they're not censoring on this platform, you're wrong. It's constant. It's everywhere you look. And it's not maybe as flagrant and on the surface as it was in the past. Just clumsy, direct, but it's happening right now in ways that aren't just removing your platform or hiding your, this is about social engineering. It is about suppression. It is about reach, not speech, not reach, or what are these different differentiations they make, which are all about the same thing. So, and I think we all recognize this has to do a lot with Israel more than anything. Torah Judaism says we are being censored on Twitter. I've already pointed this out. It's very clear, like a lot of people talking about Palestine in general. It seems that the reason behind this is that we support Palestine and are against Zionism in Israel. These are Orthodox Jewish people. For this reason, we need your support more than ever. I mean, their very existence is incredibly uncomfortable and inconvenient for Zionism, Israel, Elon Musk, Yacarino, the rest of them working with the ADL. Because they're not supposed to exist. You're supposed to believe, as Ben Shapiro would tell you, that they're trash and not real Jews, even though they're Orthodox Jews, and they are very clearly Jewish. Not my opinion. It's obvious. There's plenty of Orthodox Jewish groups around the world, or groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, that are actively calling this out and calling out what Israel's doing, saying they don't believe in Zionism. So you have to understand, you have to be able to be honest enough to admit that Zionism is not Judaism. It is a political organization that overlaps. I'll give you that. Now, I think that's by manipulation, quite frankly, but either way, it's important to recognize how many Zionists out there are being exposed by Jews that have the courage to call them out. But Twitter is censoring that exact little pocket right there, and I think that's important to highlight. It says, for this reason, we need your support more than ever. Here's their account. You can follow them. There's plenty of them on the platform. Also, I'll make sure you don't forget, APAC Tracker highlighted this a while ago, if you don't remember, where Grok essentially was exposing during a gap in their, basically it was, for some reason, there was a gap and you were able to see the censorship tags on all of our accounts. Then they immediately just pulled that away and stopped it from being seen through Grok. But if you remember, more than anybody else on the platform, I had 60. TLAV's account had 60 different tags of suppression. And still, yet magically, somehow we're able to reach people through these manipulation suppression tactics. But it's crazy. More than Alex Jones, more than everybody else out there telling you that this is important to recognize, because censorship is real and it is happening on this platform. Stephen Monticelli says Elon Musk effectively admits that posts with links are throttled, which we already knew this. Is the Substack example made that pretty clear, like just to the point of pulling down the metadata. You couldn't even see it. That's the same with BitChute. Same with my platform, by the way, TLAV, for more often than not anyway. Or at least it was at the time. I'm thinking right now I can see it pop up when I posted it today, but you'll see them occasionally where it just won't bump out the metadata. But it says, if you've been wondering why your posts with links to journalistic articles haven't been getting nearly the engagement you would, this is why. And this is Elon Musk responding. This person saying the deprioritization of tweets with links in them is Twitter's biggest flaw. Now, this is somebody who argues, at least who's engaging with the platform. I would agree with this. The only reason you would do this is to, and you could argue from the first point that from a business perspective, that it might be something you argue is, basically stopping people from going elsewhere. But that's about control, very clearly. Like with Substack, you want it to post here. We don't want you, there's way, but they're doing it in a way that's a detriment to the platform or to any platform doing it. It's an irritation to the individual. You're cutting off outside connection. The whole thing is about the ecosystem that exists with the ecosystem of social media or just the internet. And what they want is that they want only Twitter. That's the WeChat focused X platform. That's what they're making this into. Your central location for media, which, by the way, is what is not just Elon. That's the government agenda. And I think what's important to recognize is these things, as much as you might argue, might, stop people from going elsewhere, at least in the moment you could click the link, but it is also blocking. It is a, what's the right word for it? Not just control. It is making sure that you only see through this lens. And I think that's really important. But on top of that, I think it's just, it's incredible. The reason that these platforms exist for the most part, like a Twitter with 240 characters, whatever it is today, is because people come to engage and to share their content and ideas, not just type things out on Twitter. And usually that comes along with links. And here's what's crazy about that, though. There are links being shared all over the place that aren't being downgraded, but certain ones are. I'm sure you could piece that together. Some outside information they definitely want you to see. Others they don't. And they use that blanket statement to act like, no, it's applied to all equally, and it really is not. He says, just write a description in the main post and post a link in the reply. Well, yeah, which gets shockingly less engagement every time, no matter what, which is the point. How long until that stops too? This person says, avoid posting links, same thing, because it will reduce your reach. That doesn't seem like anything other than their influence over your perception. Elon Musk, again, just seemingly, who knows? You guys can decide for yourself why he continues to lean into this aggressive misinformation platform that, because of his support, is now all the way up to 1.2 million followers. Guys, this is the thing that popped up after October 7th, or rather, for the most part, to prominence, has been caught lying more than almost anything we pointed to. Whether that's the lying about bakeries being destroyed or getting Elon Musk to share fake news about Venezuela. It's been easily proven, and we've done it on this show, and yet he continues to lean into them. And the question was, how old were you when you first realized others couldn't see the Matrix? And this person responds, this Vizdragad24, a straight up Israeli propaganda apparatus. That's what it is. Most of those who are not on X cannot see the Matrix. They're leaning into his whole thing. Time to get them on X and give them at least a choice of pills. Almost seems clumsy, like they don't even know what actual now. The point is, Twitter is a part of the Matrix. And yes, just like with the Matrix, you can broadcast your pirate stream, you can be in Paul, but Twitter is the machine. And this embarrassing reality that they keep pushing. Oh, but don't worry, he got bought by a technocrat, elitist billionaire who is literally the richest man in the world. Oh, and a Zionist. But it's the outsider, guys. It's just embarrassing. Of course, then he says Matrix with an X, almost making my point. Or as I'll show you next, that we are the mainstream media. Yeah, that's my point. Like, again, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I actually get the sense that there's a part of this that is trolling you. When you think you're out there trolling everybody alongside him, he's making fun of you. You're in the Matrix, guys. It is the Matrix. Twitter is the machine. And of course, they keep tagging this platform, as I keep saying, that is just a part of that manipulation, a part of the globalist agenda, a part of the World Economic Forum, technocratic overlap, all of these things. And they're literally feeding this information to the machine that he is high-fiving and sharing to you. It is the Matrix, and they are the corporate media. I mean, it's almost too much right there in your face. And which comes to the funnier point about this, I was just talking about this. And just as I keep saying, by the way, as this gets increasingly, at least appears to be more real, like the buying of Twitter, like the others, it's a troll right up until it's not. And I love how that's actually a very smart way to play this. So we come out and go, oh no, this looks dangerous. Or what are the implications? They go, oh, you're falling for it. Oh, you're so gullible, you snowflake. And then he does buy it. And then we go, well, there you go. Well, now he's still like, I don't know how you transition from that, which happens every time, to suddenly, this is the best thing for all of us. That was a joke 10 seconds ago, or he was playing and making all the Democrats lose their minds. If you can't see that you're the one being played in that dynamic by dismissing facts until they become real and acting like it's still some kind of a long-term play, it's like he is getting you to support the new corporate media, the point is, for those on the podcast that can't see what I'm referencing, Alex Jones shared this. Elon is openly entertaining this idea. What do you think? And it says buying both InfoWars and MSNBC in viral X post. Okay. So how are we supposed to discern? So at this point, this is where it gets more abstract. Where is it a troll? Alex Jones didn't even make didn't put a /S or any kind of way to make it seem like he's being funny. Because I don't think it is being funny. I think this is a very real thing that is being kind of obfuscated by the idea that it might be a troll. So if it doesn't happen, we were all just playing you anyway. That's how almost kind of insecure these people are. Either way, the point is buying InfoWars and MSNBC. So my concern about whether the whole InfoWars thing was sort of a manipulation, because I was talking about that when it happened. Like the Onion, they're going to buy it, and then he stands up and was like, but now they stopped him, or they're about to do it, or it's this up in the air thing, which I can't find any information to actually verify half what's being said. Sort of like most of these conversations, like them continuing to hype this idea about an upcoming peace deal, and now the Democrats trying to stop that peace deal. I'm like, this is headline narrative. That's his goal. That's his go-to. Point at a headline, scream narrative for 45 minutes. How about we get into the meat of it, the facts, the actual background? No. Either way, even if it happens, my point is you're being led by a bunch of hype. So now, and back to the point about the Onion and Twitter and InfoWars, I will always stand on the principle that even if he's a part of the game and playing you, that I'll still say that the censorship or the suppression or going after him financially because of what he said on Sandy Hook are all wrong. I would say it even if I knew he was a shill or an agent, because they still use it that way. So that's the point. Yes, they were going after him illegitimately, but on top of that, now that Elon's floating buying this, how did that even happen? Seems like it was planned, if you want my honest opinion. Like this was the way it was going to go, and that was all about this theater show. And on top of that, you got MSNBC now coming into the mix, literally potentially buying corporate media. So what happens then? What happens if now we have Alex Jones and MSNBC broadcasting this? What, by the way, I would highlight just as little. Like if you look at what they're saying about most of this stuff, is even though it's coming from a different angle, look at what the corporate media says about a lot of this stuff. You'll find that the agenda seems to align more often than you might realize. Anyway, I simply wrote, and now it begins to make sense. My opinion. But I think we're watching a puppet show. We're watching this play out to where this was the ultimate end goal, to make it look like Elon saved the day from the bad guys trying to bring down the outsiders fighting for free speech. And I think that we're meant to go to this position. And I think all it does is shows you that these were all always in the same boat. My personal opinion. You guys can decide for yourself, but I think it's really interesting how this is all played out. As David Icke points out, Alex Jones literally posted this saying, "I stand ready. Put me in the game, coach." This play case used to be so sad. And this is about Alex Jones and, the Elon Musk saying this was about, buying InfoWars, MSNBC. Elon puts fire emojis. And so David says, this is the, quote, alternative speaking to Elon Musk. Quote, "I stand ready. Put me in the game, coach." And he says, what the F? This is not about overthrowing humanity's masters. It's just changing the guard and the source of subservience. InfoWars claim. Musk hints at buying both InfoWars and MSNBC in viral post. Handing Musk control of the, quote, alternative media, even besides Twitter, would certainly push back on the centralization of global power, right? Just as him taking over banking with his social credit X everything app would stop financial control being in the hands of a few, right? And the added bonus, which we can see so clearly, is that the, quote, alternative that worships him and depends upon him stops calling him out on his blatant transhumanist agenda. Everyone's a winner except the people. Are you getting it yet? I agree. I think it's very, very obvious. I actually am beginning to feel this. I get the sense that most conservatives see it too. There's no medium. I mean, outside of obvious social media, but there's no like comfortable platform for like, and again, I don't mean even social media platform. Let's use another word. There's no, like right now you have a lot of people, I think, that see this. And the people that's like in the conservative camp that recognize a lot of this stuff, they get eaten alive in these platforms if they point this stuff out. Most of them are people that are, you know, are their friends or they're on their side. And it's sort of like with COVID-19. They just keep it under their shirt. They don't want to point these things out. But I think the more this begins to become obvious, the more you'll see people like Viva Frey and rest coming out and going, this is a bad pick no matter what. Have the integrity and the courage to do that. Because this is the only thing that's going to change it, especially if you recognize where this is going. So let's get into another manipulation, which I think is just embarrassing. I already pointed this out. I'm just kind of starting with some of the things that overlap with some of the previous show. We'll get into the authentics next. Updates, what we recently talked about. And this is actually interesting because what Rebel News is doing around this story is just embarrassing to me. Now, there's been plenty of things they've done in the past that I thought were good, but around the Israel conversation, Zionism in particular, it's very clear they've exposed themselves, in my opinion. I don't mean anything other than being willing to lie for Zionism. It's very clear to me. And their own audience is calling them out on Twitter. I can see it all the time. What I'm seeing is this absurd thing that they just did with the flag, which I went over it, I think, 2 shows ago. I'll play the clip for you. Actually, we can just start with that actually right here. Where they're literally recreating this ridiculous false flag, where they're claiming this guy hit him with a flag. And even in the video they show you right here, you can hear the fabric rubbing on it. Like you wouldn't hear fabric rubbing on the microphone if they were hitting you with a flagpole. But on top of that, you could actually see the video where at best this thing brushes them. Sure, go make it a big deal if you want. That's your prerogative. If you feel they violated your personal sovereignty, it's important to think about that word in the context of what you're fighting for. Then make a, but the point is, you see specifically Ezra go after them like they're going after him because he's Jewish. It was forced. It feels absurd. It feels juvenile. They're screaming at them. They're trying to make this about something. And my point is always that they have to go this far to force in some half thing, or even if it even is that at all. You have to recognize they don't have much. And they're building narratives on top of completely false constructs. So here's what we showed you the other day. Right there. That's the flag apparently hitting this guy. Now there's one you see right there. The first one very clearly does not hit him. The flag does, or her, whoever that person was.
You're getting in my face now, sir.
Are you going to arrest me?
If I have to.
So my point on this, guys, and I'll play this for you, is that he wanted this to happen. Whether you think it's justified or not, and he has a right, the point is he was trying to instigate this. That's my opinion. But you can watch. The police were getting irritated with him. I'm not taking sides on anything. I'm just simply saying this person was out there to try to initiate something to be used to call these people out for being anti-Jewish. Even though there are Jewish groups right there in the crowd with them, he won't tell you that, though.
She was assaulted. You're not going to arrest the guy who assaulted her, but you're going to arrest me for asking you questions about an assault?
I think
yeah, he's real tough.
It could be interpreted both ways.
Right. Don't give you any more of the conversation, because God forbid you hear the logic around. He is clearly trying to incite these people. That's what the police were saying. That's what people at the crowd, that is what you can see. And I'm not saying he has every right to do that unless he's breaking the law or being violent. He can stand there and do whatever he wants to try to get them to react so he can film it and make them out to be the bad guy. That's how desperate this is. So this is what we showed you. The full video will be included. So now what happened after that, after he's standing there and screaming in the face of the cops and trying to get them to arrest him, Alex Jones, of course, reports what happens yesterday. Toronto police arrest Rebel News boss. Okay. And he says, not allowed to offend our Islamic masters. What a ridiculous framing, because that's the game, guys. He's on a side and your side is supposed to make these arguments. That's not even remotely what actually happened. You're talking about him making a big deal about something that didn't happen and then screaming at these people to where and the course is they're telling you, look, you're trying to incite these people. Now, whether you think they're right or not, they're telling you, stop this, or we're going to go after you. Now, you can get into whether or not they had the legal right to arrest him. I would say they do not. I would say what they did crosses a line, 100%. See, both these things can exist in the same conversation where, yes, he could have been out there for the sole purpose of trying to instigate exactly this to make it look like there's some imbalance. The bottom line is there is an imbalance, guys. It's all over the place, but it is definitely not blindly supporting Palestinian supporters at the expense of Jews. It's not the reality. Look at what's going on in Canada. It's the exact opposite. But this is all about trying to keep you in this mindset for, I guess, just get one more person lied to and distracted about what the genocide Israel's committing. I don't really know. But it's really lazy to me. Tim Pool, surprise, surprise. If a Jewish man wants to take a picture of pro-Palestinian protesters, it's a breach of peace. Oh, because that's what happened, right? Are you this lazy? Are you this bad at doing your job? Or do you deliberately mislead people? Because that's not what happened, guys. Here's the next video that he shares.
Because it's not up to him to say you have free speech there, but not here.
Well, yeah, because you're inciting this crowd and then it reaches.
Now, just to be clear, he's not pointing to just right now or him being there and taking pictures like Tim Pool lazily put out. It's because over the process of a couple of days, he has been out there trying to create drama, faking things with the flag, which clearly went nowhere. So I guess we'll drop that one.
Well, your presence is inciting them, and that's exactly what you're trying to do.
I'm a Jew.
No, because you're trying to incite them.
I haven't tried to.
See, right there is just silly to me. Now, let's be clear. I think their statements and stance is ridiculous from the police. You're trying to incite. Are you breaking a law or not? And just because they want to make it, now, this comes more from an American perspective, from the constitutional inherent rights. But the point is, if you're breaking a law, a constitutionally valid law, well, there's the allowance. But if you're just simply saying you're screaming mean words or your presence is making them uncomfortable, that's ridiculous. Whether it's Ezra trying to create something or not, that's still ridiculous. And the fact that they would arrest him for simply, violating some hate speech idea or some, whatever they're trying to frame it as is ridiculous. But that does not remove the fact that he seems to have been trying to get this result.
I went to take a picture of the hate crime that
You
you're
could have done it on
abiding.
the other side. You didn't need to walk over
No,
here.
I wanted to go up.
Okay, so the point he's making, and I forgot the main point, that he goes, because I'm a Jew, which I don't see that being anywhere other than in his mind. But again, I could be wrong. I know there are people out there that just hate Jewish people for no reason. That does exist. Whether that's what's happening here is up for you to decide. But what's interesting is he's saying, you going over there and trying to get them to get a response. Now, if he's just standing there taking a picture, well, that would be absurd. But I think based on what else we can see, it doesn't seem to be the case.
I don't
now I'm
think
going to tell you to
anyone-
move over there.
And
if you don't
I allowed you. I
press,
allowed you to take that video.
Let's get
I
that
allowed
on
you to
there.
take that
Yeah.
video.
I'm not
So you're
crossing the
refusing
road.
to leave?
I'm refusing to leave.
Why?
Because I'm a Jew. I'm a citizen.
What the hell does that have to do with anything? You see, he's so gung-ho in this mindset. So you're refusing to leave because you're Jewish? That's not, I think that was the wrong answer, bud.
And I'm your boss. And I don't leave because you say Jews aren't
Well, you know
allowed on
what?
the street.
In the interest of keeping peace here and public safety, you're under arrest for breach of the peace. Take a minute.
And part of me wonders whether that was all part of some construct as well, because that seems like a really silly thing to do right there. Knowing you're being filmed, pushing the boundary. But this is the story. Ezra making a big stink about nothing and getting arrested for no reason, which both are problems. That's stupid. Meanwhile, you've got people literally protesting to stop a genocide of children being murdered as they're standing there. He doesn't care about that, though. And clearly only side, obviously you can look to his work for yourself to recognize how absurd it is when it comes to Israel. But this is what we're defending. And, people like Tim Pool and the rest will make it about how you can't take pictures. Well, there's more to the story, obviously. Or InfoWars saying, got to bow to your Islamic masters in a place where they're literally going after people in every, look, the Canadian government has been so blindly lockstep with Israel and clearly supporting that and going after people who are pro-Palestinian as anti-Semites. Yes, there are other laws that go in a similar overreach in regard to hate speech that you could apply to anybody. But this game they're playing where it's about them blindly covering for Hamas, even though that's not what we're talking about. Like, it's just so ridiculously abstract and obviously dishonest.
Take this.
Yeah, I very much think he got exactly what he wanted.
I'm being arrested because I'm standing on the sidewalk in my city.
So this is the kind of stuff that gets reached by people like that. Meanwhile, we're not worried about the very, very clear crimes being committed all over the place, whether in Israel, by our governments in many other countries, by our governments in Canada, in the United States. to people that are standing there, people that are not protesting with them. The point is that you can clearly see that these governments are authoritarian. And then you got people like this that come in and try to contort the reality of that into specifically going after one religious group, which is not the case. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And all that serves to do is obfuscate the reality of what's going on in the world right now. And let's not forget that the main point of this, as they're screaming about suppression of rights and free speech, is that the people in Canada are suppressing your rights and free speech for Israel, just like Donald Trump puts forward, just like the rest of them are all clear about. Remove the Jew haters from the country, which applies to whoever they decide to call that to. Whoever they decide to call that. You'd be a disgusting person if you feel that way for just about someone's religion, but you have a right to feel and say whatever you want. That's free speech. The reality of absolute free speech. Or burning a flag. Put them in jail. No, these are all constitutionally protected acts. Until we start being courageous enough, right? Finding our honor again and recognizing that we have to stand by what we truly believe in and not just dip aside when it works for the party. Until we find that path, this will continue. And on the same note, talking about censorship and information, and in this case, biometric, Authentics is still very clearly being used on Twitter. And this is what's so concerning about people that are gaslighting for what's going on. Well, we're being driven into the social credit, digital ID, biometric scan, the technocratic reality. And so I went over this in the last show. Vincent Kennedy says the past 7 days, this quick cutting to the chase. The point is they show that Authentics is still being used, and they look it up and not for the one that I go through the reporting something and it brings me to the page that shows that Authentics is still being used. They're showing you for ID verification, for specifically, the same thing that she shows, but she gets Stripe. I actually think this is more important than we realize, and I wanted to reiterate it. So she's going, I just did this for ID verification. So here are two people, both on the same time frame, both using Twitter. One of them signs up and goes through the process, and they get driven to Stripe, which is what Elon said was what they moved away from, or rather what they moved away from Authentics. And so then, but the point is, at the same moment, here is a guy being given Authentics. So that's my whole point about this. Why? Who's deciding that? Why? And I can prove to you by many examples, this is not some country difference. There are people in the same areas getting different things. So why would that be the case? I think there's something much bigger around that. And it's not just about this one thing. I think we're all being sort of algorithmically engineered around this, different platforms, different things. There's something bigger going on here that I can't even fully articulate. Honestly, because I don't really know what the breadth of this is, but truly I find that crazy. And so my point in bringing this up again is that I too am personally seeing that Authentics is being used. Now, if you don't remember what this is, it is an extension of the Israeli intelligence apparatus, not secretly, not behind the curtain, but on the surface, on the record. I think it was Guardian that pointed out they overlap with something like 90% of their intelligence. The point is this is a group that is including your extracted biometric data that they get to keep. Now, it says up to 30 days, but I think we all know how this tends to work. No matter who we're talking about in history, that almost never seems to be the case. With COVID, they said, we won't sell your private data. And then whoops, they all got caught selling your private data. Nothing happened, actually, as usual. But this should be very concerning for all of us, especially since we can see what Israel is doing with this data, what they're doing with their AI murder programs in Gaza for Lavender and Habsara. These are public information. 972 magazine wrote about both. I don't know why this is not more concerning for people that see what's happening. Now, Jason Bassett put out a great clip from that last show, just highlighting that point, saying we've all had doubts about Twitter's connection to Authentics, but the latest revelations raise serious questions. Is it a case of social engineering, technical glitch, or something more sinister? Now, Casey Wright points out he asked Grok how long Twitter is using Authentics for verification, and it said from August 2023 to June 2024. So right there, they're either lying to you or it has been, but it's being allowed to be used for very specific things. Like maybe when Ryan Christian tries to go through the process or whoever else. I honestly don't know, but you can see it. It's public. This is the refresh page. So why then would they say it hasn't been? But then it adds I also find this interesting. It adds the information is based on the timeline provided by X posts. And he says, isn't that where all of them come from? The answers, which I don't think. I think it's supposed to be more broad, like just tapping into online data. But he says, I don't recall ever seeing that answer specifically before. And I agree. That's interesting. Almost to go like, well, but we're not sure because it's not true, guys, and we can prove it. Right now, there are people, and if you go through it look at it. Don't click the box. I wouldn't recommend going through it all the way, but go to that point, send me a screenshot. It'd be interesting to find out if there's a third ID out there for a different group. I don't know. But I know that anybody honest with themselves can see that there's something, when all of these dots are put together, that there's something clearly different going on here. Now I'll include the article or the show we did. This was on July 29th. Twitter's still using Authentics, even though they claimed that they didn't after that. Now, Whitney had to say about this person posting about Authentics on the 23rd. And we've been talking about this for a long time, guys. Why do we still have to give our biometric data to the Israeli company Authentics to sign up for Twitter? And this was posted on the 23rd of November. He says, our IDs and ages have already been verified. Good question. So they don't need anything. Twitter's not accessing or just asking for at the moment your biometric data. It's just you just have to confirm what's already on file. But then Israel steps in and demands your biometric data. Why? Why is that? I think there's something clearly going on. And the point is, he just did this, and you can see it says Authentics right there. When he says, if you're concerned about governments arresting people for social media posts, which again is Elon and the rest, rightly so, are pointing that out in other places of the world, a trend set to worsen and continue, as can be seen currently in the UK and Canada. Never give a social media platform your ID. The NSA and signal intelligence agencies already know who you are, but it's tricky to prosecute an Anon account for online speech if it means the finding out who operates the account is illegal. Give the site your ID and dox yourself. It will make their job a lot easier. Then she says, this isn't some far off concern. The last time Trump was in office, it's amazing how many of these things overlap to when he was in office. His AG, Bill Barr, legalized pre-crime, which we've talked about many times. And the DOJ has since arrested people for threatening social media posts. That's pre-crime, guys. That's literally what we're seeing. But people in the Republican circles right now don't want to identify it when it comes to this location or anything that ties back to Trump. The Trump admin also considered a proposal to use AI to monitor American social media accounts for warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence. Trump called in 2019 for social media giants to monitor American speech to prevent shootings before they happen. Right? Don't think it could happen again under a Democratic regime or with Trump's new AG pick, blonde Bill Barr. I think Pam Bondi, I remember off the top of my head. Personally, says, don't take the chance. I don't give your Twitter and don't give Twitter your ID. Well, if you remember, I don't know if this is the exact clip that she's referencing, but one of them is specifically about this point.
Because we're losing a lot of people because of the internet. And we have to do something. We have to go see Bill Gates and a lot of different people that really understand what's happening. We have to talk to them, maybe in certain areas, closing that internet up in some way. Somebody will say, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. These are foolish people.
And realize he just said that about the flag burning, called them stupid people, both of which are fundamentally incorrect. Doing what he just said was a violation of your rights, and burning the flag has been roundly deemed to be and is constitutionally protecting it under your inherent rights, whatever you think about it, which I would find disrespectful as well. But it doesn't change the reality. So here is where this is going, which I'm sure you all know. But this is actually pretty crazy. Bernie just shared this. This is from Australia. And I mean, the point of this is to show, and let's obviously point out, as Caitlin Johnstone would make very clear from Australia, that Australia it's same with New Zealand and different locations, which, interestingly enough, haven't heard a lot from lately. New Zealand is ultimately kind of a testing ground, a vassal state of the United States empire, right? I mean, that's at least how even they would frame it. The point, though, is that you see things there. It's an indication of where this is all going. And this is about the digital ID being now mandatory for children under 16 to access the internet, which is exactly what the UK is doing. It's exactly what the US has floated more than once. It's a big, and it's all coming. And so, and the X in overlap, I'm convinced, is to make people that would be most resistant to it passive. Emma points out the government can politely insert their heads tightly up their behinds.
When they say it's mandatory, it's not. If you're an individual, you will not have to have.
Oh, for the podcast, this is going from 2023 to today. So the point is saying it won't be, and now it is. That's how this works, and it's almost always the way it goes.
Have one of these digital ID. The fact that it's voluntary. People who don't want a digital ID don't have to have one.
Okay, and you're guaranteeing that it's not going to be compulsory. You've used the word voluntary a few times there.
So I am really trying to say to people, if you don't want it, don't have one. We have been very clear. It is a voluntary system and it's simply a means of verifying yourself.
Right now, one of the Israeli ministers is saying that under Trump's administration, there'll be a time for voluntary migration out of Palestine. It's the same overlap. That's not what that will be. They don't want to leave. Voluntarily is a euphemism for basically saying that anybody that didn't do it is a terrorist. It's how this works. And how do you think this works, right? Once you don't comply, you're now outside the law. It's how they work this.
In a way that gives you control of your own documentation.
A world first. Australian children under 16 years old will be banned from social media under new legislation to be introduced.
We're making 16 years old the minimum age for social media.
Tech industry body Digi says to enforce a blunt ban, all Australians would have to provide their personal information, such as an ID or an image of their face, to verify their age.
Can you point me to the bit in the legislation which restricts the eSafety Commissioner from designating digital ID as a means of age verification? Is there anything in the law that says that says the eSafety Commissioner cannot do that? There's nothing in this law that says that.
Always. I mean, that's my opinion, obviously, but if you look throughout history, guys, it's a, and I wouldn't even say that was always the plan from the start, but it's just an escalating. It always continues down that line, right? So the next person wants more control, more, and I think that is the agenda to start. Now, this is from December 14th, 2022. Digital ID blueprint for all 50 U.S. states published. No big ass. The point is, this has been around for a long time. And they are trying to slow drip this in to get you to ask for it. Now, I'll include the articles we've covered and some of them that we've covered. I think there's one that just popped in my head that was probably a better one to pick. I can't remember what it is right now. But this is one Derek wrote in the past, exposing the digital ID is a human right scam. And this is one of our recent IMA panels where now I think we have one set for the 29th coming up, and it'll be around Bitcoin, Donald Trump, rather as the reserve currency and the AI overlap and a bunch of interesting things. This one's from the 27th of September, digital ID, the foundation for technocracy. Bipartisan digital ID is a part that I think is definitely coming, and I wrote about this here. And then this one is the SAVE Act, Real ID, and ID 2020. And this is just an obvious Trojan horse in my mind to get you into digital ID. The Real ID compliant identification, that's digital ID for you. And that's already there. It's being slowly put in front of you right now. Now, just on this note, I just want to point out the concerning reality of what Elon brings to the table. I just think it's so alarming how, whether it's things like this or just the overlap, normalization of things that the largely Republican side would be aggressively resistant to if it came from anybody not part of their team. And he simply says, meanwhile, some idiots are building manned fighter jets like F-35s, because that's kind of the news right now about, as anybody honest has been saying this for a long time. It's just the blunder that it is. But this video is crazy. This is what's coming. This is what's here right now. So I think it's interesting to point out why this is not something that is more in our faces. I think the worrisome kind of understanding of that is what stands out. That usually when it's not in your face, even though it's this prevalent, there's something going on. These are drones. Drone swarms. This is the future of warfare, unfortunately, if not already, right? But look at that. It's incredible. It reminds me of the Starlink satellite thing around the world. That's terrifying to me. And this isn't necessarily about Elon himself or, you get the point. But just to show you, these are the kind of things that they're all leaning into, excited about. And I think this is the direction that is taking us into our subjugation. And this last point was just interesting. Here he is saying, your phone is fine. You're not going to cause, basically that your phone doesn't cause cancer. Now, I know recently there's been a lot of studies coming out and going, no connection, which, they used to say that about a lot of things that are deadly today. Or, how many times you got studies that show you the COVID-19 vaccine is totally safe for injection. My point is, it's pretty stupid to me that they can sit here and tell you that there is no risk from your phone. Look, maybe your phone's not the risk, but I can tell you what is. The EMF, the radiation coming from the device, the Wi-Fi, what's the right word for it? Receiver in your phone. That's a no-brainer, guys, especially when we get to the 5G territory, which we're already in. Are we really going to pretend like these things do not verifiably have influence on whether your free radicals? I mean, guys, it's not a question. So it kills me how many studies you can find about the idea of the cancer developing on the side you use your phone on. Like, these aren't definitive. But if we're really going to try to downplay the obvious and unquestionable risk of 5G radiation or anything like that from your Wi-Fi devices, these things are verifiable. So I just think it's an interesting kind of sidestep to say, don't worry about your phone. But you know why? Because I think there's a whole ecosystem being built around that with his empire. Personal opinion. Either way, I find it really alarming that we have this kind of things, stuff like this. This is like somebody today still pretending like cannabis is the most dangerous drug on the planet. It just seems like a little bit of a deviation from the reality. On that, speaking about the deviation from reality, let's talk about the Trump cabinet conversation, or specifically the dynamic within it when the worry I have about not just the ethics documents and so on. I'll make my points about all of this, but what this seems to highlight for me. And I think there's a lot of overlapping parts to this. Now, this is Matthew Van Dyke simply says, this is what we call a red flag. The refusal to sign standard ethics and transparency agreements is the clear indication, this is his mind, of what to expect from Trump's administration. They aren't draining the swamp. They're flooding it just like last time. Now, frankly, I agree, but I don't agree because of the signing or not signing of these ethics. I care very little about these, quite frankly, because I don't think they matter. I think they sign them and they don't care anyway. But let me point out why I think this is concerning. There's a lot of things that stand out to me in all this. Now, remember some of the stuff we've already talked about. Again, the title from Politico, Trump team barred from agencies amid legal standoff. My point about the Senate confirmations and what that might change and who actually becomes in power, the Israel funding through people like Miriam Adelson, or things that we don't even see, and whether what they're doing right now is to allow more of that, and what that might gain those people access to before these things. There's a lot of weird overlaps to this. But my bigger point is around how this might be this time frame, which I talked about before, this kind of weird limbo is being used. And you can decide exactly how. Oh, I got it. Screenshot it right here. So it says advisors to RFK Jr. reached out to Health and Human Services multiple times after Donald Trump tapped him to lead the agency, hoping to jumpstart coordination before his takeover. They were rebuffed. So as you're going to see, that's a worry. I would hope so for people to go, whoa, okay, wait a minute. So RFK's of the mind that he has this, he's going and he's reaching out, and they said, no, we can't. Because Trump hasn't he hasn't signed these documents, haven't gone through this process yet. So first thought is to go, okay, well, is that because they don't want RFK to get his hands on the data that he'll inevitably have access to that would show Trump's been lying about these shots? Maybe that's because he won't be put in that position, both because none of them want them there. Something to very much consider, but just out of the gate. Now it says Kennedy's inability to communicate with the agency he may soon manage, confirmed by an administration official with knowledge of the episodes granted an anonymity to describe internal deliberations, is just one consequence of the president-elect's continued foot-dragging on signing the standard trio of ethics and transparency agreements with the federal government, something his team pledged to do shortly after the election and something he did last time right away, which I think is an important point, because obviously anything like this is the first thought is going to be, oh, screw them, because that's the Democrats, and they're trying to go after them, which I think is a ridiculous oversimplification. But from my perspective of being, I guess, outside of the inclusion that he's part of this problem of the deep state and so on, the idea being that the government is not your friend. So not leaning into these arbitrary documents they want you to sign to pledge that you don't have conflicts of interest, or you don't, even though they always end up doing so anyway, seems kind of a ridiculous, unnecessary step, especially because I don't think they care about these things. It's more about some kind of signing on to being part of their process. So then, rightly so, you might get people from Republican side saying, good, he's bucking the system. Maybe that's the indication. But once you see the fuller picture of this, I think it's more than that. But I get why that might be the response. And I want you to at least consider that kind of sentiment, the assumption, the willful, the hope is being used against you. At least consider that. To lean into hoping that, or rather leaning into the hope with no evidence to back it up, because that's what makes sense for what you believe he is, as opposed to just waiting for facts that we can verify and being more skeptical than you would against anybody else because you believe in him. And it goes on to say, it means they can't access cybersecurity support, and this is for all these agencies, or secure email servers for transition-related work, or request FBI background checks for their nominees. So one of the things is about the transition part of this. the Senate confirmations and them claiming to do their own due diligence, which I argue is an easy way to set this up to fail. If they keep dragging their feet on this and basically tie the feet or, tie the hands of the process, whatever you think about it, it's not to say that I believe in it, they will then point at that as a reason why they weren't able to get enough background on these people and they push back. I feel like in a way this is being set up so that happens, so they get the people that are always the plan from the government. But it says both the Trump transition and the White House confirmed to Politico that negotiations on the agreements are still underway. But until the standoff is resolved, Trump's cabinet nominees will gain no more insight than the general public into the workings of the departments they're supposed to run. Now, in the same point on the other side of it, they can then point at that and say they wouldn't let us have access, and that's why X, Y, and Z didn't happen, or that's why these things happened and they weren't supposed to, whatever that fills the blank for. Even though, like, every time this happens, it's both sides playing a part. They could have just signed these documents, but you can argue they didn't have to. They could have just gone through the process, even though they didn't. And you always is how this goes. Very interesting to me. And also, what are we talking about in the negotiations? For what? We're talking about them signing ethics agreements, so they're negotiating what those things would say. That's not what I understand to be the process. So it's a weird way to say that. That stood out to me. But it says, without the agency agreements in place, Trump's team can't access any non-public government data. For example, surveillance data on the COVID-19 side effects. But it says that includes classified elements of the administration's involvement in conflicts in the Middle East, Ukraine, and details of high-level conversations. So that stood out to me for obvious reasons. So we have, again, which I don't seem to be able to, I don't see any evidence to prove this is happening other than statements made by people like Alex Jones. But the idea that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are conducting secret peace negotiations with Ukraine and at Mar-a-Lago, and now the Democrats are trying to secretly stop that from happening, building a narrative on top of a narrative that we can't prove. But either way, the point is, well, okay, so that means we can prove right now that they don't have access to inside information that they would add to what they might need to know. Or they don't know whether there is a conversation going on that we're not privy to. I made this point just today. I was speaking with Sean from SGD Report. Like, this is a striking, this stands out over everything else. You have a current person who is not sworn in, does not have the legal authority to be conducting these conversations. That's if it's happening at all. I do not trust blindly what Alex Jones says. So, but if it is, though, isn't that a problem? Whether you think he has good intentions or not. If they don't have up-to-date information, if maybe they make a mistake, and then then it's the current administration's fault or problem. And then the bigger point is, if they are doing that, why wouldn't the Democrat administration go after them for it? Because we're led to believe that they're cheating and stealing and lying, doing everything they can to ruin Trump's chances and remove him from power. Well, here's your opportunity. Make a point about this if that's the case. I think they're all working in the same agenda, and that's why it's happening this way. But you can decide. To me, that stands out pretty clearly. We even had the argument that Elon Musk, in his own right, reached out to an Iranian ambassador about some kind of a conversation. These are unverified, but statements coming from internal circles. I mean, you can look on Alex Jones' page. He posts 75 things about that over the last couple of days, just like about the same show, really. You get like 7 posts from different angles and different clips, but it's the same idea. They're secretly working to achieve peace, and I just don't know why that wouldn't be a problem, even with the best of intentions. That is an overstep right now, more than anything, especially with somebody who's like Elon Musk, who does not even have a position, and at best is going to become some co-runner of a non-existent place right now, if at all. And he's conducting the negotiations. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm the only one saying how crazy that is, and I don't know why. And again, it's not because some hate Trump dynamic. It's about anybody doing that. It seems like a wild overstep to me. Now, it says members of Congress in both parties are also alarmed, with 3 Senate Democrats suggesting to Politico that the lack of FBI background checks could prevent Trump's nominees from securing confirmation. See my point? Pointing to revelations this week about Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz, who decided to withdraw. So you could argue that this is the Democrats trying to stop it, but if they effectively drag this out to where they argue they don't have basically preventing these from securing confirmation because they didn't have the time to do it. I mean, it's all narrative, right? But at the end of the day, it kind of seems like they're fulfilling exactly what we thought was the likely possibility, to stop people like RFK Jr. from being in position that the government doesn't want, left or right. Now it says, quote, if there's a lack of proper investigation into a nominee, I don't think the Senate Armed Service Committee would allow the nomination to move forward. See? This is one Republican close to the transition suspected that Trump officials are in no rush to sign the agreements because they believe the operation is running smoothly from Mar-a-Lago without federal assistance, which probably is the case. Few things the federal assistance will improve, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a give and a take from this. And on top of that, that if you really want to lean into these things, which I'm the last one that wants to, but the idea of whether there's a process that's supposed to be followed, right? Whether there's legal avenues that are supposed to be taken. But it says, and many on the right are urging Trump's team to buck the rules by continuing to use private funds to pay transition staff and conducting their own personnel vetting as they prepare to take over the government. Okay, so again, hypothetically, what if they take this all the way and say, look, we don't need your money. We're getting funded from Israel or whatever else. All the high-level elitist oligarch technocrats that are funding us. Both sides, by the way, if we remember correctly, both of them had the same kind of backing. But they take it all the way. All right, so they use their money, which it gets into more. That's kind of this getting past this phase with unlock federal funds and so on. But it also opens the door for them to be vetting who is funding them, you see? So right now they're allowed to take money from foreign entities, but they have to use their own money. So they're continuing to do that. And then they pay the staff to conduct their own vetting. So, okay, we get to the end phase where they're supposed to be confirmed. They argue, well, here's our information, but they didn't have the opportunity to do it themselves. But again, right there, you would argue, why wouldn't they? Couldn't they just do it on their own right now? Bound by some kind of bureaucratic process? Yeah, it's stupid. But either way, my point is coming to the end of which it seems like this is going to be the inevitable outcome. And then you're going to have people on the right saying, good, screw them. We're not going to go through their broken system, which partly I would agree with. But you can see how this is they both add to it ultimately happening the way that I think the government wants it to. And everybody points at the other side. Now it says, quote, they don't need the hassle, argued one Republican familiar with Trump's 2016 transition and the current one, granting anonymity to speak about private deliberations. It says, quote, without the public funding, they'd be left to organize the transition the way they want, instead of taking the public money, which opens them up to a GSA and the quasi-public organizations whose sole mission will probably be to derail them. Fair point, right? I mean, to argue simply that there's clear, whether it's the left or just something else, or just individual personal actions, people that could use that to try to, slow it down, derail it, which largely, if you look back in a larger, 10,000 elevation view, it suits them all to keep this ongoing process. Like the whole government shutdown fiasco theater that happens every time. Well, while they're pretending that's the case, which is not pretending, but it's I think that's an absurd play. Good, let it shut down. The way that we even have a system where that even possible, it seems so it's manufactured, in my opinion. The point is they're not doing other things when that's happening. In this case, I think at the end of the day, stopping this or allowing to create or having 4 years of investigations, acting like we're trying to go after them, we're trying to investigate whether they stole the election. Well, now we just end up in this 4-year cycle where it's basically the selection and then the theater pretending they're fighting back and forth until the last couple of weeks and they start the selection game again. So that's kind of what I think we're talking about here. But I do understand the idea of people, trying to derail it for their own personal agendas. At the end of the day, they're using their own personal money to carry out this process. Where's that coming from? They're all very wealthy, but doesn't that matter? Where the not during the selection process, but during the actual, so now they're coming into power. Wouldn't it matter if you've got, let's say, I don't know, a foreign entity funding things like that? Now it says, even as ethics experts worry that Trump's team hasn't yet begun the agency review work that's needed to ready to be ready, they warned against starting the work before signing the 3 memorandums of understanding with the General Services Administration, the White House, and the Justice Department. He says, quote, there's no basis for a president-elect's team to enter federal agencies and have discussions without signing these memorandums of understanding. The director of the Center for the Presidential Transition said this. Now, to jump ahead quickly, the point is, I understand it, these are legally required. But I'm not one to, is it constitutional? My opinions on these things. The point, though, is just for process. Democracy Now! Refuses to sign the ethics agreements required by law. Now, you can read about them. That is the general sentiment. We'll come back to this. Now, it says the main thing that says is that the members of the transition team will be bound by an ethics agreement that ensures that they're using information appropriately, that they limit the use of lobbyists and foreign agents, and that individuals who leave the transition and go back to the private sector won't use the information for personal gain. Well, okay, if there's something in these things that they want to point to as why, oh, here's how they manipulate us, bring it up, call it out, show us why it's corrupt. But it's a weird thing to kind of push back on and just let the crowd go, yeah, screw the government, which I agree with. Well, what you're really pushing back on is pledging not to be unethical, pledging to be constitutional, pledging to not use insider information against other. You see my point? Or use lobbyists and foreign agents while you're in a position of power. Well, I think this is the classic idea, is where you're using what we want and care about to cover the bigger problem. And there's no better example of this when we see, like with COVID-19, the Democrats or the Republican side of this, and Israel right now, or the free speech that they use, like with Donald Trump and COVID-19 in his time frame, where him being in place pacified the most resistant. Same thing's happening now, in my opinion. So that's interesting to me. So especially as we now know they're not being given access to federal money because they haven't signed these yet, so they're using personal funds. And this allows them to not have to divulge who is giving them money, foreign lobbyists, whatever else. Doesn't that seem a little bit organized? The Justice Department, meanwhile, offered just days after the election to start briefing the Trump team on ongoing operations and processing security clearances for its incoming officials, but cannot do so until the Trump team signs the agreements. Without the DOJ agreement, the FBI also cannot conduct background checks of his cabinet picks, which has already emerged as a potential hurdle to confirmation. Back to the point. So what if they just drag? I mean, even the fact that they drag us, they sign tomorrow. And even if it doesn't stop any actual process, I guarantee you're going to hear about it. They're going to say, this is why we have to push back or why we didn't have enough time, just to make a point. So it's not about whether truly we'll have the consequence. It's about whether that's the excuse used to fulfill the agenda that I think was the plan for the government. Soon-to-be Senate Majority Leader John Thune said Thursday that in the absence of the federal scrutiny, so under the, pledging to these documents, scrutiny, I mean, the idea is simply they're pledging to not do things that are against the law, and whether that's, the point, the scrutiny simply is opening them. So that's actually important. It's not about whether they're ethical or not. That's just what they can sign and go along with. It's whether they're scrutinized for where their money's coming from. That's what seems the lobbyists, the foreign agents. And it says he and his fellow lawmakers who will be voting on the slate of officials will have to be, quote, very thorough in vetting these nominations and ensure that the correct background information is available. Well, okay, they're going to take their word for that. Do we not know how this works? They're going to say that this is not full, even if it is, because that's how politics works. So all you're doing is setting up the justification to push back on exactly what I think they want to. Now, it says still the Biden administration remains hopeful the Trump officials will ultimately sign at least some of the agreements, and has both publicly and privately offered the incoming team whatever assistance they need to be ready to govern on day one. So I keep hearing all this hype. I mean, Alex seems to have kind of dropped it, but this idea that they were secretly working to stop it from happening, maybe, it wouldn't surprise me. But that would mean to me that that's what the government wanted, not the individuals. I know not everyone agrees with that. But I find it interesting that everything that you can see seems to be showing you the opposite, which adds to what I'm saying, that this is the plan. And that these people are really hell-bent on getting you to think that they're secretly fighting the whole thing, because that keeps you in support of the blind support of whatever they do, even if it challenges what we'd otherwise say maybe isn't right. Maybe you should sign the ethics pledge. Maybe you should make sure we know where your foreign money is coming from. Maybe that matters. But not if they point at it like you have to, and they say they're trying to force us, deep state. They go, oh, never mind, right? Clinton couldn't get this done, biometric wall. Oh, then we should. It's so easy to play people like that, like basic reverse psychology. Now, it goes on to say, in 2004, the 9/11 Commission published its investigation that found the legal battle over who won the 2000 election that delayed the transition from getting underway was one of the reasons the eventual winner, George W. Bush, and his administration were caught off guard by the terrorist attack months later. Now, that is the most ominous part for me, because now we see not just the Senate confirmation or the excuse of why they have to push back on Trump's picks. Now you have the justification, even they signed tomorrow. All they're saying is the delay in getting this done that's exactly where they are right now. They're apparently way past the time it's supposed to happen. So I guess normally in the middle of November. So what happens later? They go, well, we were waiting to get this process done. And so ultimately, that's why we were caught off guard, because we were delayed. And even if it's their delay, it's an interesting point to make that that's why Ukraine happened or why Israel happened, whatever it is. Just an interesting precedent for the same thing happening before something major. Now, it says Trump's decision thus far to forego federal transition assistance and cooperation is unprecedented in the modern political system. So why again? My gut tells me it's because of where money is coming from right now. And that seems to be one of the main things that gets boxed out as this money. Now, that also makes you worry. Let's just say the government decides to go, well, you didn't sign these, like Biden kind of said, sign some of them, but we want to get you moving anyway. And then all of a sudden you get access to all these things. And maybe the people through Trump have access to all of those things because this was not fully done. See my point? If you're out there denying that Israel is not actively working through Trump, then I don't think you care about the truth. The evidence is so shockingly clear. And it's no different than Biden or Kamala. Now, it says Trump's team, the first time he ran, they did the same thing. Or they did it the way you would argue is normal, signing this in the middle of November. And then Joe Biden's team did the same in 2020. Holding off on signing the agreements has freed the Donald Trump transition team from having to abide by a $5,000 cap on donations. Well, look at that. And a requirement to disclose their donors. So now you have no cap on what foreign entities can give to you or anybody, and you don't have to divulge where they're coming from. Same point. But in addition to delaying coordination with federal agencies, it has prevented them from gaining access to secure government email servers, office space, FBI background checks for incoming officials, sparking concerns beyond the incoming administration's readiness to govern. So again, that's my point, is what happens if they decide to go, well, which I doubt will happen, but if they do, you've got people that are, I argue, funding and acting through them, and then they open up the email servers and information, which is about classified information. But either way, my point is action, first and foremost, is about the money or whatever else is happening around this. This is amid an uptick in hacking this year, includes breaches of Trump's own team as recently in August. Of course, these were the narratives we were told about Iran. Never seen this stuff fully fleshed out. Experts are alarmed, it says, that the transition is eschewing federal cybersecurity support, particularly as they begin to receive intelligence briefings. Okay, so here's the overlap. Are they getting intelligence briefings, or is it like the Pentagon said, we want to, but we can't yet? Like, I bet you it's both. I bet you that this is getting so convoluted, and because Trump does have influence and access, especially being a former president, that maybe we are. Now, who else is getting access to that intelligence? And what is that doing? An idea that you're pushing back on cybersecurity support. So what happens if a major thing happens? And, you realize how many times Israel has, acting through other channels, or just blatantly themselves hacked and manipulated U.S. intelligence, stealing nuclear technology, bombing U.S. ships. I mean, there's so many different things in history you can see. And now that they are, and by the way, the cybersecurity usually run through Israel anyway, but I think it's not about, I think, some kind of opening gap. It's about giving the impression that is what you could point to later, or the justification for what later happens. These are all my thoughts where I see this going. Quote, it ends, until they sign this agreement, they're not yet government employees. Now, that's my point from the beginning. If they are not, which they're not, based on the legal reality of this, how are they out there conducting major world-changing discussions? If that's even happening. If it's not, then someone needs to call out who these people that are saying that. But it says they can do anything they want. They can have any conflicts of interest they want. Oh, so sorry, you have to read that in the context of the quote. Until they sign this agreement, they're not government employees. They can do anything they want. They can have any conflicts of interest they want. Think about that in the context of who's funding him. They could be taking money from foreign governments for all we know. Wink, wink. I think that was said for a very clear reason, guys. Richard Painter, the chief White House ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration, said this. The guy who, obviously, and he worked for the Republican administration. The point, though, is that he's clearly tapping on the foreign government dynamic there. He said it explicitly. They could be taking money from a foreign government, and this is exactly why this would be done, to facilitate that, to hide that. And that would not be Miriam Adelson, which I believe is the same exact thing. What they're talking about is literally they could be Israeli government funded, and we wouldn't even know because of this gap. I don't know why they would be that lazy, but hey, what they've been doing this whole time seems to show you that they don't care. But it says Trump and his team need to convince the American people, including the people who voted for them, that they're working to help the country, not just make a bunch of billionaires even richer. Not signing these agreements is a great way to tell all those working class voters, thank you very much, now F you. I really find this a concerning dynamic. I think what we're watching is something that it's the gap in information and transparency that's allowing something to begin before Trump's administration really starts. And you know what my thoughts are on this. We're getting into some more stuff in regard to the Israeli overlap. I think it's very transparent, quite frankly. Now, these are different posts just simply highlighting why this is the case, legally required to sign these. But yeah, I'm not really worried about him signing something that, that none of them even care about. None of these people are ethical. But I am worried about the use of this opening for other things and whether that gets overlooked anyway, which then opens this gap for his entire administration, which would say a lot to me. Now, in regard to the picks, again, I want to highlight that there are people that are having the courage to call this out, which I think is very important. Eva Frey came out and said, I don't care if Trump's pick for Surgeon General is apologized, because apparently that's the narrative now, that she's changed her mind, doesn't think these things anymore. I find that really hard to believe. Suddenly she's not pro-mask and pro-vaccine and hardly. That's what I think this is. I mean, let's realize that even Donald Trump is still promoting the vaccine, still promoting Operation Warp Speed. So it doesn't really make much sense. But Eva Frey is calling it out and saying, I don't care what they said. This is a bad pick. That's how we have to be. If you think that, then say it. Don't be cowed along by other people in the team sport politics side of it. They don't care about the outcome. They care about winning. They care about certain agendas. Hopefully, we all care about what's best for the country. Now, here is Greg Reese with a video about basically the video. Well, it's not just Oz, but it's just, you can see the different people he's highlighting. It's saying Trump is surrounding himself with Operation Warp Speed accomplices. He writes, are you getting it yet? Alex, Joe, Tucker, Russell, Jordan, the Tates, the Weinsteins, on and on and on. He says, you think the self-proclaimed father of the vaccine was going to appoint people who would expose his central frontman role in the death and health destruction of untold numbers? What a Trump-Musk psyop has been played on you, and you've fallen for it big time. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to, you don't have to blindly believe it because we say it, or he says it, or I think it, but I do want you to, I would really hope that you'd be willing to at least consider that possibility, based on how much evidence really does show, at least indicate that that's where we are. Now, here, I'll play you what Reese was pointing out. If I can grab it there, I just downloaded it real quick. Is that it? Yeah, here you go.
The bioweapon that was released on us, the vaccines, that needs to be communicated effectively in the new administration that something bad happened.
I mean, think about even saying that. Like, okay, so what if Trump comes out tomorrow and says, you're right, it's all bad? Most of them are going to go, all right, and just completely ignore half a decade of lies. Just nonstop, just continuing to push it and say it's good and it saves people and nobody gets hurt by it. That's lunacy. At the very least, he has to go, well, here's why I've been saying that for 5 years. But that won't happen. So I just think it's crazy. Like, I get that I get in these partisan circles, you got to be very careful, which I wouldn't, but I'm saying I get why they would do that, because they get eaten alive by people that, but that's the problem, isn't it? We should just care about the truth, our integrity. And at the end of the day, it's obvious that this is not an honest situation. So I think we just need to say that. I know, no, obviously you can give them the opening and say, well, maybe there's more to the story that we don't see. But that is not a justification. It means this is wrong. We know it's wrong, but maybe there's more to it. We'll find out. That's the best you can do right now. That's what the evidence shows.
Of us would like to see justice for the millions murdered by the nanotech-infected shots. But don't hold your breath. If approved, our next cabinet will include, as administrator for Medicare and Medicaid, Dr. Oz, a television personality who pushed implantable chips, transgenderism for kids, and pushed the deadly COVID vaccines repeatedly.
Should people have their children vaccinated?
Definitely yes.
Definitely yes.
Definitely yes. As a doctor, even I'm in awe of the incredible advances made in search of a COVID-19 vaccine. Never in the history of mankind has a vaccine been developed at this speed. But just because we're moving fast doesn't mean we're moving unsafely. We're cutting red tape, not cutting corners. I trust the science and the scientists behind these COVID-19 vaccines, and you should too.
What can you do after you get the COVID vaccine?
Secretary of State. Marco Rubio will be our new Secretary of State. He pushed the vaccine and boasted that Operation Warp Speed was a huge success.
You can say a lot of things about the way America responded to the pandemic, in the early days, but the one thing that's without dispute is that no one has done vaccines better than the United States. I mean, look around the world and look here.
Just on a side note, how much you want to bet who his team gave him the shirt and the hat and said, we got to make you look like a normal guy. Not that these people don't have football teams they like, but I want to always think about that. Like, these people are literally a construct. When you actually find out a lot about them, you find out that these things are, half of them lie about, like, we know where they come from, what they grew up doing, because it's a construct.
And look at the fact that right now, basically, at this point, if you're 12 years of age or older and you want a vaccine, you can get one.
If approved, Tulsi Gabbard will be the director of national intelligence. She helped get all the older people vaccinated early on.
3 weeks ago, I urged our leaders to put those over 65 years of age at the front of the line for vaccinations alongside healthcare workers and first responders. Now, today, I'm happy to report that the Department of Health and Human Services has now agreed to this strategy. So if you or your loved ones are 65 or over, you will now be able to get the vaccine if the leaders of your state comply with these recommendations.
At the time, and well before, I was screaming about how crazy that was, how dangerous it was. Here's what their data shows you. It's more dangerous than anything for elderly and children right there in front of you, and they would force it on them first. Trump, Tulsi, all of them, all to this day support this.
If approved, Dr. Jeanette Neshawat will be our new Surgeon General. She was also pushing the masks, the deadly vaccines, and the censorship.
First of all, vaccines save lives, and I am so excited, and I thank and I commend Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg for taking action, and I hope and pray that other social media platforms
for censorship, by the way, for censorship,
will follow suit and do the same thing.
If you are fully vaccinated, then it is safe to go outside, to go hiking, biking.
You think she just changed her mind when Donald Trump still says the same thing?
To enjoy outdoor dining, to be around other people who are unvaccinated without a mask. Now, that is if you are fully vaccinated. It's also important that if you start your first dose, you get your second dose, because there's many who are not making the appointments for their second doses. Wow. And you will not get that 95% safety and efficacy if you don't get both doses.
All the lies, right? And again, don't forget, we're talking about relative risk. That's relative, not absolute. So it's instead of 95% difference between taking and not taking it, which amounts to about 0.08% of actual protection. Like, this is all provable information. This was directly from, I mean, I've shown you this from day one, and I still bet you most people don't know that. She didn't care. Now, of course, it's possible she changed her mind. But I think it's important that if they did, they come back and go, yes, and I was wrong right there. And here's why that was wrong. But you'll never get that. And frankly, I think it's pretty clear that's not the case.
You can go back to the very beginning of Operation Warp Speed. Trump's been pushing the vax the whole time. He even called himself the father of the vaccine.
And look, I guess in a certain way, I'm the father of the vaccine because I was the one that pushed it. I pushed the FDA like they have never been pushed before.
It shows you how unpainful that vaccine shot is, so everybody go get your shot. I recommend you take it.
People that do get it get better much quicker. That's a very important thing to know. They don't get nearly as sick, and they get better. Lindsey Graham's an
exact opposite
example. He said, if I didn't have this vaccine, I would have died.
I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines.
I think I saved many. I don't think. I know. I saved millions and millions of lives throughout the world.
We saved tens of millions of lives.
How can you possibly make a rationalization with this? You can either say that you think he's wrong and doesn't know it. If you try to, if you try to pretend like he knows what he's doing right now, that's horrifying. It's more horrifying almost that you think that rationalization makes sense, that for some political benefit, even if you think at the end of the day it saves more lives over the next 100 years, you're still allowing children to die. I just don't, this is an immoral rationalization.
Credit. Don't let them take that away from you.
Okay, so the president made news.
Do you agree with that? Right?
Both the president and I are vaxxed, and did you get the booster?
Yes.
I got it too.
And
so
just
right there, the idea that it wasn't just the way, so you got I don't even know whether they got him. Got a booster on top of it. I don't need to keep adding to it. The clear point is he said it right to this day.
Recently, on November 22nd, Trump wrote that Operation Warp Speed saved hundreds of millions of lives.
Mm-hmm.
There is no signs of justice for the millions murdered by the deadly shots. And if the nanotech in the shots is the interface between humans and AI world, then I would expect another fake pandemic and more shots.
I mean, that's obviously a fair point to make, but the point is to be critical about whether you think look into this stuff for yourself. Just realize there is evidence to back up the possibility of exactly what he's talking about. But whether that's really the full picture, you guys can decide for yourself. But the point is, wouldn't that just perfectly overlap with exactly what we're talking about? And if this all really does come together like that, the question is whether people will be willing to accept it or acknowledge it, and then truly recognize that Elon and Trump and the rest of it played their roles perfectly. Now, in the conversation of kind of, I mean, I'm glad to see that here's what Del Bigtree is saying about RFK Jr. or the whole thing. A little bit of criticism, but realize that this is still, like, a lot of these people were the ones that were kind of pushing back on anybody else that was trying to highlight the problems as we were coming into this point. So and this is what I think, this is what frustrates me about this. Like, Jimmy made the same point that, well, we know RFK wouldn't allow this. Well, we don't know any of these things. We don't know what his true mindset is. We want to believe we know. But on top of that, why do we pretend he's got influence over this right now? He may. Doesn't have to. He may be told that. Maybe he thinks that it's not true. I mean, if he's reaching out for information from HHS and they're going, we can't give you that yet, then he's not in the know. And it says, if you were RFK Jr. and you wanted to make lasting change to the vaccine program and would be embraced by all people and eliminate vaccine injury forever, would you? A, nominate outspoken doctors that were critical of the vaccine program and had been labeled anti-vaxxers by your legacy media, or B, nominate trusted mainstream doctors who saw the value in releasing all of the existing safety data to the public and promised to be transparent with the nation about their own journey of discovery in the process. Now, this is the wrong one, by the way. Give me 10 seconds, see if I can grab it real quick. Son of a gun. I won't make you wait. So the point was, there's ones where there's a lot of people are coming out and at least being a little bit critical about where these things are going. Now, this is interestingly different because what he's saying here is the opposite. The idea is simply saying, like, what would you want to do? Like I say, if you're in this position and you're not recognizing your bad choices and you're instead rationalizing it like this, I doubt whether you have clear mind in this discussion. Because what we're talking about, you don't have to pick it's not between anti-vaxxers that they hate versus mainstream doctors. There's obviously people in the middle of that conversation that are very well-regarded doctors that see the problem, but are not screaming about, that are not all or nothing. That that's my point, is that clearly, if I had to choose, absolutely, I would go with the doctors critical of the program that were labeled anti-vaxxers. Absolutely. Because at least they see what we all can prove, that what you proved, Del. Why wouldn't we? Because they don't like what they look like? Doesn't that seem crazy that you're cowing to the same structure that we're all pointing out as part of the problem? I love his work, and 99% of the time. My point here is that I think this is the problem of the paradigm. That honest, good people out there fall for this. If you think that's what he is and what he's doing, fall for the partisan manipulations. That at the end of the day, we're falling into the ideology, or rather the persona of what these people are, instead of just going, yes, pick the people that got it right. Period. Frustrates me. Now, the other point was just about them being mildly critical about some of the things happening, which I think is a positive point. This is actually more important. And he says, Toby Rogers responds by saying, Maha voted for A based on assurances from you that Trump was a changed man and had learned his lessons, which I don't think anybody should believe that. Now you're trying to sell us on B, picking mainstream doctors because it's crazy, right? We won the election, which I don't think is what happened, but I don't think we're actually in a voting process personally. We should be. It'd be paramount in an actual representative government should we want a state, which I don't. But it says no need to keep giving the keys to the kingdom to the same mainstream liars who have been genociding us for 38 years. I agree. Now, this person points out, or the account, oh, that's right. It's Elon's PAC, the America PAC or whatever. Very, very original. America. It says, despite the meltdowns from legacy media, the American people support President Donald Trump's handling of the transition cabinet. No, they don't. Guys, as far as I can tell, the majority of people are at very least a little bit worried about what's happening. The fact that they have to rush out like a very Israeli Netanyahu-esque kind of propaganda, everyone loves everything and you're all wrong. No, that's not what's happening. We all see it, but it's nice that you want to scream at us about what we should think. But Elon just says popularity of real Donald Trump grows. That's probably true. But my point is that most people out there are very clearly, I would argue most people in the conservative movement, which is the majority of what I think is the point here, are they're willing to consider different things. I have a much higher opinion of most everybody, the average American, but yet are still trapped in the ideological game of left-right paradigm. My point, though, is that they see the Israel pics, they see these things, and they go, "God, that's not what I think is America first." But I'm going to hope he's got it inside. They also get played, like I would argue, by like the Dell point, where they want to believe that Trump's the right guy, and maybe he's being played, and whatever the justification is that keeps it going down the road. My point is, though, I think they see it. So this is, I think, ridiculous. I think most people are recognizing this is not going the way it should. For example, Daniel McAdams, who it was very supportive of this possibility through Trump before we got here, and maybe still is, but ultimately one of the people I more than anybody standing by his integrity, his principles, and saying these wrong, bad pick, not what we were promised. Good on him. This one is crazy. He says, listen to this carefully. This is the buffoon that Trump has named a senior advisory position. That's Gorka. He says, this is the opposite of what people voted for when they voted for Trump. Opposite. Sebastian Gorka. Now, this is on a Spaces where they're talking about, I mean, I'll just let it speak for itself, but it's actually pretty crazy to me. The things that he says around Syria, around Ukraine. I mean, I actually agree. I don't even think most conservatives agree with most of this. I think this is a blindly pro-State Department government perspective. And really, if you listen to what he's saying, it's well before Donald Trump has been like the go-to talking points for, Russia, bad guy. No, NATO did nothing wrong. It's like, that's not even what most conservatives think, in my opinion. But here's what he says.
With regards to the war in Ukraine, I've been very clear from the beginning as former strategist to President Trump. The idea of any murderous KGB colonel using the forces of the Russian Federation to invade a neighboring state for territorial aggrandizement is wrong. We've had a taboo since 1945 on the Eurasian landmass. You do not use military might to make your country bigger, whether it's...
Oh, is that true? Don't be surprised if we don't get to Israel next, because he doesn't know about that problem.
Crimea, whether it's South Ossetia, whether it's Moldova, or whether it's Eastern
Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. No, those don't count, though.
Ukraine, that is what Putin is doing. It has nothing.
And to be clear, they all matter. But obviously, Ukraine, Russia is a very different dynamic than what's going on here. And of course, once this actually stops, like there has been plenty of gaps in what's going on with the occupation of Palestine, well, what Russia does then will make a big difference. And because if ultimately Russia then pulls back and allows the peoples that were in these war-torn areas to go back to their homes and does not try to take that territory, well, then we'd be in an entirely different position. Because what Israel did is never give that territory back and continues to take more of it and continues to displace and ethnically cleanse and destroy land and just murder and rape and kill and torture, all verifiable. The point, though, is that we have right now with what's going on with Russia, despite being driven into this by the U.S. NATO apparatus, there's been a lot of lies spun around what happened in general. But any wartime, I'm going to guarantee that governments commit crimes. Almost always, in my opinion. I think that's what they do. But I have not seen examples of Russia trying to aggressively just take more territory and absorb more locations. I mean, clearly they've had the opportunity to. But I would really willing to argue at this point they probably could have taken over all of Ukraine. But I don't think that was ever the design. Now, I'm not a military expert, but I think that seems to at least more territory that they have not taken. But ultimately, once this stops, there'll be a larger indication of what the real point is. So he's just simply saying he already somehow knows that Russia was only doing this to take more territory. It has nothing to do with the neo-Nazi elements that were ethnically cleansing all of the Donbass for a decade, or in Crimea in the same regard to some level, or the simple fact that you have a growing entity there that is being primed against you, and you can prove it and see it like I have myself. None of that matters. They just want territory because he's a monster. Guys, that is straight up CIA, U.S. government talking point stuff. This is the guy that's going to be working for Trump.
To do with NATO aggression or because the West caused, whether it's Crimea, whether it's South Ossetia, whether it's Moldova, or whether it's Eastern Ukraine. That is what Putin is doing. It has nothing to do with NATO aggression or because the West caused it. Vladimir Putin, for the last 20 years, remember, former KGB colonel, has stated that the Ukraine is illegitimate. Not only illegitimate, it is also does not have a right to exist as an independent state. And he's said the same things about the Baltic states. And
this is really interesting in the context of Israel. Now, first of all, specifically the Donbass and Crimea. Again, do we really have to go through this same? This is my point. I don't know what you think about his intelligence level, but I would argue he's smart enough to know that Crimea was not taken by Russia, that the evidence, aside from the European, Western, Israel lie dynamic, is very, very clear on paper 1,000 ways over. It was a referendum with the vast, vast majority who chose to go with Russia because they're mostly ethnic-speaking Russians. That's provable. Same with the Donbass, who then you can prove 10 years back up until they started, they were being killed and murdered and tortured by the people in the Azov movement. And even CNN and corporate media were covering that until suddenly they changed their narrative. You think he doesn't know all that? He has an agenda here, covering up all of this. Now, you can still argue that Putin has designs to take the territory, but it has to stand out to you that you have to hide all of the facts to get to that point. And then there's no real indication of that other than Israel. On the other side of it, you see Israel and the U.S. government and Azov movement themselves straight up telling you they're going to do that. It's funny how easy this stuff is, but people go along with what whatever you think is driving his mindset.
And about Poland, which are actually NATO members.
Oh, and then about Ukraine, I want to make sure we touched on that, not existing. It's so fascinating to me. Now, look, you can argue from a lot of different angles that there's, for example, going back to the pre-Ukraine in general and how that got established, or the continued manipulation from outside forces, 2014, along with a lot of others, literally putting their own puppets in place. So you can argue that ultimately at this moment that doesn't exist in the context that as a state and sovereignty, that it's an asset being used by foreign countries. But, or you could simply say that he doesn't think it should exist or have a right to, which I would disagree with. The point, though, is about what the outcome shows. And I think that this is being taken intentionally out of context or manipulated to make it seem like he's saying that they don't exist and shouldn't, as opposed to saying, here's why it's illegitimate in the context of foreign policy. But once we're done, Ukrainians can have their country, which is what I think is going to happen. If I'm wrong, we'll talk about it then. I don't think that's the case. And I think everything shows you that's not the case. And if you look at people that are still critical, but know more about Russia, like an Eva Bartlett or Vanessa Beeley, they'll tell you that this is not what they believe is going to happen. But we all have to wait and see what actually comes to pass. Hopefully if Trump creates a peace ceasefire and everything stops, I hope that happens. I don't think it will, at least not in the way we think it is. But think about that, about what he's saying here, and it's like trying to create this dynamic that makes it about Putin and genocide, almost using all the same tenets to make it seem like that's what we should look at. He doesn't think they have a right to exist. He's trying to take their territory. He's trying to kill everybody. You're literally talking about Israel's genocide. Right? Well, just kind of conflate that with what's going on with Russia and try to pretend like the U.S. government was not literally trying to force this into happening for a long time. I mean, Foreign Policy Magazine literally wrote about it right before it happened, that they were trying to cause that. It's just the evidence is overwhelming.
Can you source that? Excuse me, about the Baltic states and about Poland, which are actually NATO members. Can you source that?
So you didn't hear him. It's just, I love this whole interaction. It's hilarious to me. This guy is the hubris and the smug nature of the way he acts. It just kills me. And it's very uncomfortable for me. Like it makes me, it's gross. The point though, is that the guy jumped in and just said, do you have a source? I mean, this is a Twitter Spaces, right? This is not a monologue. And the way he reacts is hilarious to me. And clearly he feels like he's on the defensive. My point though, is that he lashes out about people interrupting him. And then you'll hear him doing that every moment he can when he doesn't like what they're saying. Typical for partisan hypocrisy.
Excuse me?
Do you have a source on that? Because
I can send you all the translations in Russian and in English. I can send you all. Can I?
For example, right? So you ask him a question, he starts to answer, and you jump over him, and then get mad that he doesn't let you keep speaking. These things are comical in my mind.
Does not have a right to exist as an independent state, and
he said
the same things about the Baltic states and about Poland, which are actually NATO members.
Can you source that?
Excuse me?
Do you have a source on that? Because
I can send you all the translations in Russian and in English. I can send you all.
You know what I mean? Do you have a source for that? And he's, excuse me, what'd you say? And he said, do you have a source for that? Because and he jumps over him and then chastises him for interrupting him. That's what these person like this, in my opinion of him, very full of hubris, right? That's the usual kind of smug response.
Can I finish? I can send you all the sources going back 21 years and beyond. So that's not a problem.
Or you could just say it out loud. That'd be nice.
Former MI guy. It's what I do. Beyond that, he has said on the record on multiple occasions, and you can use that very highly classified TSSCI system called Google to look it up. he has said on the record that the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century, was the...
Like you're in kindergarten, right? You following along?
The loss of the Soviet Union. So
because ethnic Russians were left to the whim of other states. Finish the quote, Sebastian,
can I finish? I was asked to give my take.
Obviously, see, there's a very important reason why that was left off the quote, right? Because we're talking about what was being done to the people in Donbass and Crimea, ethnic cleansing. But yeah, it's not important to brush right over the top of that and yell at you for jumping in.
Because ethnic Russians were left to the whim of other states. Finish the quote, Sebastian,
can I finish? I was asked to give my take, and you can just hold your fire. You want to talk, you wait till I'm done. And then my take on this war is a very simple one. Ukraine is fighting for their survival because of the Holodomor, because of Stalin starving to death. At least between 8 and 8 million Ukrainians in the 1920s and 30s. The Ukrainians will fight to the last, not man, they'll fight to the last 12-year-old who can actually lift an AKM. So that they will fight to the last child.
What's the off-ramp, Sebastian? Are you
I
seeing
said
an
there
off-ramp?
wasn't an off-ramp. Again, listen to what I'm saying. I said there isn't an off-ramp. You don't have an off-ramp with KGB killers. And you don't have an off-ramp with proud Ukrainians.
Yeah, especially when you blow up North.
I mean, think about how wild this is. So you're promoting as a positive, which by the way isn't true, that Ukrainians are going to fight to the last child. So now we're okay with child soldiers if desperate. Like, the point is that's not true. You can see the Azov movement scooping up people and forcing them to fight. And the U.S. government, like Lindsey Graham, forcing that, kept driving them, telling we're going to make sure that happens. And you're promoting this like that's some kind of a noble pursuit. That's not what Ukrainians want, at least by and large. But and look, there's public conversations about this, sort of like with Israel. They're hiding from you what most Israeli people are saying about what's going on for a reason. So it's just kind of crazy to me that that's the point.
Wasn't an off-ramp. Again, listen to what I'm saying. I said there isn't an off-ramp. You don't have an off-ramp with KGB killers.
Oh, so there's no off-ramp for them because it's their fault. There's clear fault on all. To be objective about this, they're not devoid of fault, but to pretend like this is just the fault of some Soviet Union era dynamic is just lazy. And again, it is completely, whether Trump or Biden, it is a government talking point, guys. And this is the opposite of what we would talk about. This is what Daniel was saying. He is not what they were promised. This is the exact opposite.
You don't have an off-ramp with proud Ukrainians.
Yeah, especially when you blow up Nord Stream. You
To
don't have an
exist as an independent nation. You don't have an off-ramp with a Ukrainian nation that is proud to be an independent nation.
No, when we blew up Nord Stream, there was no off-ramp.
So when we, and this is now declassified so I can discuss it, when we were in the White House and we saw Bashar al-Assad decide to use chemical weapons again in Syria, we actually...
Oh, here we go. Now note that Aaron Mate is in the conversation. This is crazy to me. So now we burst into the Syrian conversation, right? You mean, so the chemical weapons they use that have been roundly disproven by damn near everybody? I mean, I'm going to show you some examples in a second, but just the one that I tend to. But the major point is, guys, this has been roundly, and more than most anything, Aaron Mate, more than anybody, nailed this to the wall. And here he is just kind of casually throwing it in like a Nikki Haley quote. They're gassing children, even though you can prove that exactly what she's pointing to is not true, or any number of other dynamics. I'm sure he'll tell you that the government shot his protesters in Ukraine, even though we can prove that's not true. I can play the clip for you yet again, or in Syria, or anywhere else. How much you want to bet he has all those lockstep narratives too?
You saw the movement of the munitions from a certain air base in Syria. President Trump said, hit it with 52 cruise missiles. That wasn't
right. Commit a crime, please. Hey, let's cheer about that. That's a crime. There's no declaration of war in Syria, never has been. And on top of that, what you're talking about is not a crime. You're saying that they have weapons. So does literally everybody. It's incredible to me. Many things he says in this are complete and obvious war crimes. Just because you say bad guy Syria, or you claim he's committing chemical weapons attacks when we can prove it's the opposite, doesn't mean you can just murder whoever you want. But let's get ready for another Trump administration where this seems to be the guidance.
For Bashar al-Assad alone, That was for little Kim. That was for Putin. That was for the mullahs. He sent a message saying, you screw around with weapons of mass destruction against civilian targets, we're going to send you a message. But more important,
I'll go and play this really quick then. So here's Carla DeBonte. This goes back to the early 2000s. This is about one of the earlier examples of them claiming that Syria had used chemical weapons. Now, she's from the United Nations, and her investigation showed that it was the rebels, otherwise known as the people the U.S. government were funding. And that got very quickly put to bed. This is very public, but not public in the sense that corporate media covered it or that anybody else other than the international entities that wanted to highlight it cover, but nobody cared. Because just like we're seeing in a lot of ways today, but more so before the October 7th dynamic, that it was so easy to shout people down for being a racist or being what is it? Syria, what did the terms you use? I forget now. It happened. They use the same kind of terminology over in Iraq, same kind of thing, like an Iraq toady or an Iraq. I forget what it was. The point is that it's very easy just to shout people down and scare them away from being the one highlighting the thing that makes you the bad guy, when in reality, the evidence has been there from the beginning.
Our investigation for crimes against humanity and war crimes, we collect some witness testimony that made to appear that some chemical weapons were used, in particular nervine gas. And what appeared on to our investigation that was used by the opponents, by the rebels, and we have no indication at all that the government, Syria, the authority of the Syria government, have used chemical weapons.
It's incredible how much there is out there like that. And this goes back to the beginning of it. Then you have, for example, Robert Fisk, who went and investigated on one of the other examples, Duma, I believe, and openly exposed what happened. Now, Aaron Amate, again, got a lot of promise for that, rightly so, because he nailed that to the wall. Here this guy is just telling you the fake news.
When it comes to Vlad specifically, when we had the intel, likewise, declassified, that there are 300 Wagner Group Russians, and you know what Wagner Group is. They're not an independent PCC. They're actually working for the Kremlin. When we
either way, regardless of whatever we want to tell ourselves in the United States, I would argue that the truth is probably more complicated. Like we would pretend that we know about Iran and their military or what these groups are, or they're all Iranian proxies. They lie about everything. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not some truth to it. My point is, whatever they want to pretend it is still a part of what Russia's government has decided is part of their military, what part of their group. It's the same as the U.S. working with Blackwater, if you want to look at it that way. Or who knows? The bottom line is it doesn't change the military, legal, and international law dynamic of what Russia deploys. So the point is, when they go on to tell you that they just decided to bomb them all, even though they were there legally, even though they're part, that Syria invited them to the country, doesn't matter because we can do what we want, right? Might is right. That's what these people promote.
Saw Russian little green men running around Syria. President Trump said to Mattis, kill them.
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but think about how crazy that is. With a nuclear-armed country who is legally allowed to be in Syria, the U.S. government is not, and just because they're present, just murder them? Yep. I mean, that's what he's saying. Now, Gorka could be lying about it. My point is that we've seen Trump take similar action. And no matter what your political stance, that should be concerning.
Just kill them. Turn them into red mist because we're not having Russia destabilize the Middle East.
Oh, because Russia's destabilized the Middle East. It's not your illegal occupation, ethnic cleansing, bombing campaign, and then, rapid stealing of oil and resources from Syria. No, it's not that, right? It's not your starvation tactics against Iran. No, it's not your complete 10, 20-year destabilization. I mean, every single location we could talk about. But you want to pretend that Russia being there, which, by the way, has been the saving grace for why Syria still exists today, easy to verify. The point is that Russia has been fighting off the attempts to balkanize the entire Syrian area. But they're the ones causing Middle East destabilization. No, it's the support for the Zionist entity that is destroying the entire area. And, by the way, everything else under the guise that they're fighting some evil villain. Like, it's just lazy. The evidence is right in front of you. I think he knows that.
We killed every stinking last one of them. Now, just stop for a second. The guy who's supposed to be colluding with the Kremlin killed 300 Russian mercenaries.
Of course, now that's supposed to be the point, right? How can he be pro-Russia when he murdered them all? So you get war crime or Russian puppet, both of which are complete. Like the bottom line is whether or not Gorka's telling the truth, whether they bombed 300, I find it really hard to believe that would go over without a problem from Russia. My point, though, is that clearly there has been incidents where they've been bombing back and forth in Syria, for example, and things like this have happened. But I just think this is such a deliberate game that's being played to make it seem like because we want to push back on the Democrat narrative that he's secretly working for Russia, which I think is silly. That way it rationalizes the illegal action of murdering Russian entities who are legally allowed to be in Syria because you just don't want them there, or because you claim that they're destabilizing something that you're destroying. I don't know why anybody takes this seriously right now. Like, this is like old school neocon stuff. We should be laughing at this.
One operation. No president, not even Reagan, has done that since 1917. That sent a very simple message. Oh, by the way, little Vladdy Poo in Moscow didn't even hold a press conference about it because he shat his pants.
Oh, I'm sure that's what happened, right? Clearly, we can see how that worked out. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, you can argue that he didn't respond because he thought it'd be to his detriment, or does that sound like that makes sense to you? Clearly, there's no indication of that. Like, the world stage seems to show us quite the opposite right now, but we'll go along with whatever makes them feel proud about themselves. Usually the game is, if you have to pound your chest and say, look at how great I am, you're probably not that great, right? You have to say, look at how strong I am, I'm better than you, you're probably the weakest one in the room.
That's why I like President Trump back in the White House, because America is strong and bad guys, they get a little bit worried.
Sebastian. Oh, okay. So yeah, bad guys get worried. You mean like the Israeli genocide? Doesn't seem to be slowing down. Like the idea that we say the bad guys get worried. Who are you talking about, Gorka? Yeah, are you talking? And like Trump is, just like in the last presidency, he's part of the government, not left versus right. So the U.S. government, who actively funds the worst people in the world, who actively work with the authoritarian government of Saudi Arabia, who actively blindly support Israel's genocide, who actively continue to support elements like the moderate rebels or allow Israel to fund Hamas to keep the area away. This is who we're talking about. What bad guys exactly are you talking about? People that are fighting. I mean, I don't even know who I can make an example of right there. What bad guys are trembling because Trump's in power? I'm not even going to say that there's probably an example, but I would argue it's not because he's going after villains of the world, but probably because their agendas contradict each other. And that might not even be a bad guy. But to them, they'd make him the bad guy because that's how politics works.
You really exemplify the high caliber of intellectual acuity that we can expect.
Carry on the ad hominem, dude. You have no qualifications to be in this conversation. Carry on the ad hominem.
Well, by the way,
that's great. Don't address what he's saying. You're dumb and not welcome here, and we're not right. That's and interrupting him while doing so.
I kept low games as much competence as you, that's for sure.
Sebastian Gorka is accurately pointing out.
Okay, here's Aaron Mate.
While everyone in Trump's opposition and media was accusing him of being a Russian agent, Trump was indeed being very hawkish toward Russia. What I think Sebastian misses is how that played a role in this current crisis. Look at Russia's proposals from December 2021. When it submitted these draft treaties to the U.S. and NATO. A major issue was addressing the problem created by Trump killing the INF Treaty. The INF Treaty, negotiated by Reagan and Gorbachev, had eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons pointed at both countries. Trump killed the INF Treaty while his opponents were claiming he was a Russian agent, and that created a very big threat of a new arms race. And Russia submitted draft treaties trying to address that in December 2021, right before the invasion. So this wasn't just about Ukraine. Trump also did what Obama wouldn't do, in that he sent weapons to Ukraine. Obama was under a lot of pressure after the 2014 Maidan coup to send weapons to Ukraine. Trump came into office. His opponents are calling him a Russian agent. He relented immediately, and he gave the weapons that Obama wouldn't send. And that also played a role.
See how that works, guys? This is always the game. The partisan narratives rationalize that, so it ultimately happens. Like, so it's too hard for Obama to do it, so Trump comes in from another side of the argument and does it from a different angle. Which he's fighting back against the deep state or whatever becomes the justification. The point is, it's the same agenda. If you really stand back and look at this, it always goes the same way.
In keeping the war going in the Donbass, rather than having everyone respect the Minsk Accords, which was the agreement to end that war. So I think Trump played an overlooked role in actually fueling this war in Ukraine, no matter what he tries to claim now. So I want to ask Sebastian two questions. Can you?
So the gist of it, meaning that what Trump's actions led to the creation of the war, as opposed to Gorka's point that he'll be the one that's going to stop the bad guy Democrat war. It's clear that it was the government, but clearly his actions through Trump's administration absolutely led to this. But that's the point I'm making, is that it's always a tag team. Right? There's always one part from either side that comes together to make the real picture.
Recognize how policies like that contributed to the war in Ukraine. And on the question of Syria, I know this isn't the topic, but since you mentioned it, you claim that the Trump administration received intelligence that Syria committed a chemical attack, and that's why Trump bombed Syria. Well, we also have reports that there was intelligence doubting the case that Syria committed a chemical attack, and that the incident was in fact staged by sectarian death squads on the ground.
Funded by the U.S. government and other NATO elements.
There was a report by Seymour Hersh about that for Kanche Kuhn in 2017. And we know from whistleblowers in the OPCW that investigated the 2018 incident in Duma that they undermined the case that a chemical attack was carried out by Syria. So I want to ask Sebastian, are you saying that there was no intelligence inside the U.S. government saying that, in fact, the claim that Assad was guilty of that basically questioning the case that Assad was guilty of a chemical attack? Are you saying that there was no intelligence that undermined the official pretext for war, which is that Assad was guilty?
Yeah, I'm not going to fall into a trap talking about classified information because I still have my clearances and I'm not going to risk them.
So you won't deny?
Oh, he's so cool. He's got his clearance and my information is just too top secret. I can't get into that. You're beneath me. Wow.
Good,
but I will.
That's good. So you won't deny it.
No, listen, are you another person who can't listen? Are you another person who can't listen? I couldn't give.
While you interrupted them, he's clearly always the smartest person in the room. Clearly, at least in his mind.
A rat's ass what Seymour Hersh says, because I was in the skiff.
Wow.
I was in the building, and I.
Oh, because he's insider, right? I know because I heard what they told me, and I know because But Seymour Hersh, a world-renowned investigator who proved this with many. My point is that it comes down to what he believes, whether because he's forcefully telling you that, but in my opinion, it's either because he does believe these things, which I think is pretty embarrassing, or because that's the narrative that's being spun. Either way, it's coming from because he was in the room. You mean with a bunch of liars and career politicians that have manufactured entire stories around these false? Yes. I'm going to go, at least more so consider, the investigative journalist that's broken down facts to prove that you're lying. That's just me, though.
I saw, and I can talk about it. Another person who can't listen. Are you another person who can't listen? I couldn't give a rat's ass what Seymour Hersh says, because I was in the skiff. I was in the building, and I saw, and I can talk about it because it has been declassified. I saw the incontrovertible evidence based upon the prior chemical weapons attack from the same Syrian Air Force base, that they were moving munitions from that base to use them against civilian targets again.
So I already played you Carla Del Ponte. He's referencing one of the earlier examples. Every single time like that, we can prove the evidence points the other way. So what they're saying is because of our narratives. So you stand in a room with career liars who justify the bombing of people who are there legally because of other actions. But look, they're moving vehicles around because you fill in the gaps with, they use these things because we can prove it. What's the incontrovertible evidence, Gorka? I'd love to see that, seeing as how that's not on the table. All these examples we can prove, like Aaron's talking about, have been shown to have been manufactured lies. That is the reality of the evidence, just like we can see the reality of the evidence around Israel's lies and currently committing a genocide, which you'll also desperately avoid.
Yes, I'm on the record because that is declassified, and that is the certitude that we had.
Declassified what? That you said you're in the room and that you know because you saw? Wow, we're blown away by the declassified intelligence.
The attack had to happen, had to take place. And I can't comment to your prior utter counterfactual. Oh, sorry, we insulted the Russians on INF, therefore, but the fact that they did nothing for 4 years is irrelevant. I can't talk about pie in the sky and unicorns. I can talk about what happened and what.
It's just so childishly dismissive. What you're saying is really stupid. Like, you could make those arguments and make it more factual and analytical. Pie in the sky unicorn. What he's talking about is a factual event that I've covered myself. The reality of the different treaties. There's more than one that we've talked about over the build up to this that were backed out of by the U.S. primarily, which caused these things to become more complicated, which caused them to become more tense. And on top of that, you can literally prove how much they've been trying to manufacture exactly what we're watching right now, more than once.
What didn't happen? Under Obama, they invaded. Under Biden, they invaded. Under us, they didn't. If you want to embroider that into an alternate universe, dude, I can't help you.
That's the only thing that proves this to you, because this happened then but didn't now. I mean, guys, this is the way they play the two-party paradigm against you. There's a lot that this has been an ongoing agenda that's more than just one example and one time frame and what they have done is build this, and it goes back long before the current situation. That's where we talk about the CIA being involved, talked about the building of the fascist entity, the Operation Aerodynamic. I mean, this has been going on a long time, and this was during the Soviet Union time frame. Right? We talked about Prologue. What was it? Mykola Lebed was a Nazi war criminal that they brought in and put him in New York City and let him run a media agency who was a known war criminal from Poland. And this became the basis for the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists. And they built this, and that is what we're dealing with today. And they're using it today yet again. But let's pretend like we don't know any of that. And let's act like they haven't been destabilizing this country for their own purposes for a very long time.
It wasn't about insulting the Russians. It was about killing a treaty that had barred an entire class of weapons. It was a huge achievement of the Cold War when Gorbachev and Reagan negotiated INF, and your administration killed that.
You're not addressing the facts of Russia.
Oh, so now it's okay to interrupt. Got it.
And when Trump and when Russia put out proposals in December 2021 to address the standoff over Ukraine, its main demands were neutrality for Ukraine, so not joining NATO, and also addressing the placement of offensive missiles aimed at Russia. And that problem was made exponentially worse by the U.S. killing a treaty that had limited those missiles. So I don't see how you can dismiss that connection.
In a weird way, it made it exponentially worse because they didn't invade anybody. Yeah, I got you, buddy. You're a geopolitic.
What a lazy argument. So the point is, it very clearly got more complicated. But all you can do is fixate on the one point that you think defines everything. Well, these obviously, but if you look at the actual dynamic, the media coverage at the time, the actions that build to where we are now, this is not just that this happened, therefore we know the truth. The reality is that this continued to build. They continue to drive this into reality. And it has to do with a lot more than just Russia and Ukraine. The Syria dynamic, right? Russia's involvement. There's 1,000 different different levies and pulleys that we can see where they're manipulating the situation. But if you just want to fall back and say, well, they didn't do this, but it became more complicated. Well, the obvious nature of it is that it was, because it clearly led to where we are. Are we acting like there was some kind of complete peace zone during Trump's? I mean, it's just not true. I think people live in this fantasy world when it comes to their partisan beliefs. They want to believe that he was this good thing. It's like them saying that he didn't start any new wars. There was no conflict, which is not the truth.
Geopolitician.
And Aaron, remember the forerunner to that agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine, the bilateral strategic partnership agreement that was declared in November of 2021. The forerunner to the signing of that agreement by the Biden administration was the work of Mike Pompeo, who throughout 2020 created the foundation for what would later then get codified as the strategic partnership that included, among other things, a codified assurance that Ukraine would join NATO, which was then cited obviously by Putin as one of the primary grievances that led to the initiation of the war.
Right. So there's exactly the point, right? So that was a clear push in that direction. Now, whether that immediately in the time frame led to an invasion or not was clearly a part during Trump's administration to build to the point we're at now. That's called nuance, right? But you can just oversimplify it to a point that makes your argument sound better. Doesn't sound like an honest thing to do.
And it's very refreshing. I appreciate Sebastian's honesty that he's willing to celebrate a policy that made the world a much more dangerous place by taking away a treaty that had kept thousands of missiles.
Yeah, when Russia isn't invading countries, the world is dangerous. How dumb are
you? Is Russia invading countries the only metric we can use in this conversation? I mean, these are intellectually dishonest arguments.
I mean, really, when Russia isn't invading its neighbors, the world
I'm not
is
defending.
dangerous.
And what about, so is that the only group we're allowed to, what about the conversation of who U.S. invades? The U.S. is currently occupying more countries than anyone in the world, and we don't talk about that? That's not the issue, and it's not about one mattering more than the other. They both should matter, is the point. Or Israel currently doing that to multiple countries right around. But right this moment, we're talking about Egypt on the border. We're talking about Syria, Golan Heights. We're talking about Lebanon in the north. We're talking about Palestine. These are all legally proven occupations of foreign land. Why isn't that part of the conversation? Why isn't that concerning to Gorka? I think you know why.
You can't gaslight us. You can't gaslight us, whoever you are.
I'm not saying that the Biden administration was any better. I'm asking you because you served in a certain government about your own role in the current crisis. I have plenty of criticisms of the Biden administration. I think both of you, the Bidens and the Trump administrations, had the same policy of undermining diplomacy, not taking it seriously, and not taking Russia's security concerns.
I love that because that usually takes the feed out of the argument that usually comes about how you're fighting for one side versus the other. And I you look at his work, he does. He's critical of both.
Seriously. So I blame you both.
Diplomacy is irrelevant without force behind it.
Yes.
If you don't understand that, you don't get diplomacy. But next question.
It's really important to prioritize force when you're talking about the world's top 2 nuclear powers.
Heaven forbid behind it. How do you turn is behind it into prioritize it? Again, you're gaslighting.
Because the so-called diplomacy is being driven by the threat of force. Pretty obvious, right? So that makes it the primary point of it is that if there's force behind it. The diplomacy might makes right mindset that Trump is currently pushing, or just I think is our government's agenda at this point, is what leads to war. Pretty clearly, we can look back through our own history and see that because that's what's being done. So I think it's an obvious point, and I think Aaron makes it well. The point is just this kind of flailing deflection to act like you're so crazy. Unicorns and the responses speak for themselves, I think.
Stop gaslighting.
Okay. Keep saying gaslighting more.
Is that how you do diplomacy, Sebastian? You just yell at people to stop gaslighting? How does that work?
Michael, hold on. Okay, guys, you get
the point. So I honestly think that there's valuable parts of this that show you things that are it's a kind of a microcosm of the larger problems that are happening. Now, just include for you to check out for yourself, Pierce Robinson post this. This was on the 25th of today. As of September 2024, the OPCW and states parties have failed to address key questions regarding the Duma chemical weapons deception and the murder of 43 civilians. And so this is just for you to look into your own time. This is the actual post from the OPCW. The point of it, if you look in, here's the actual post called 5 years on, the OPCW Duma deception continues. It's just reiterating based on the facts that we can still prove that this was a deception. We were misled. Aaron's work has been foundational in that. People like Robert Fisk, for example, have highlighted that we were lied to. And yet the apparatus still pushes the lie. Just like with the literal genocide happening in front of you while they tell you you're lying to yourself about it. Same way it always goes. One other point I want to include before we get to some other points about the administrative picks. I find this to be really interesting. So, you know my opinion of Laura Loomer, and I think that she's one of the worst examples of what independent mainstream alternative media has to offer. But what I found fascinating in this is that through the endorsement from Trump, which is crazy, more than once, like in main stages, pointing to her and saying, and I think there was a reason for that because she is a shocking, rabid Zionist supporter. 1.3 million followers on Twitter now, which has gone up crazy since all of that. She has been boxed out of this whole thing now. Like for the most part, she was seen being brought with Trump to certain things. And I think people rightly were like, look at her work then. And we're like aghast by how cartoonish she is. And that's my opinion, but look for yourself, guys. If you're either a blind follower of her, like because you just believe you like her so much, or you're a very clear partisan person that doesn't care about the facts and you'll high five about whatever supports the narrative for Trump. If you just objectively look at the work that people like her or Matt Wallace, it's a cartoon. It's ridiculous. It's hyperbolic. It's assumptive. It's crazy. But you can look for yourself. That's not the point. The point is that I think what's interesting is this is how the machine operates. These people are used when they're useful and drop when they're not. And she goes, let's talk about what's really happening. She says there's no such thing as a political realignment. So here's the interesting part is that right now you're getting told that this is about the unity party, right? People are joining up from all the parties because we're saving the country, and she hates that. I think it's because that's boxing her out, not because it's I don't even believe that's really what's happening. I think this is just more partisan games and government agendas. But what's interesting is to see how other people are responding to this. But my point is, she's going, that's not really happening, which I don't think it is either, but from a different perspective, excuse me. And she says, what you're seeing is people who spent the last 9 years of their life canceling Trump supporters and conservatives wake up and realize they are about to be irrelevant in the new media landscape with Republicans in power. So now you have a bunch of high-profile leftists coming out to say things like, I was wrong about Trump, all while these same people try to actively sideline and cancel Trump's most loyal supporters. She's talking about herself. trying to make it a broad point, but it's clearly about what's happening to her. Now, there's a part of that I agree with, but she pulls it right back into left versus right. And that's my point. It's not the case in my mind. But I do think that there's a game of trying to sort of the opportunists in the media and different, like going the other way, trying to suddenly go, okay, we're going to show you about Israel. That's what I'm seeing. And it's happening in the two-party part of this too. But she says, that's all this is, which I don't agree with. She says, the people who tried to destroy Trump now want a seat at the table, and they will do whatever they can to destroy his closest allies so they can remain relevant. So I am of the mind that she is a person who has been used in all of this. Totally not in the know. And that's why she's so frustrated by the fact that she's getting, so ultimately she gets used to reach a certain audience, to get Trump influence for the government agenda. And now she's lashing out at the people that are trying to work. And they're whatever they do to destroy his closest allies, her, so they can remain relevant. Saying the same leftists who attacked Trump for 9 years are currently at Mar-a-Lago trying to blackball Donald's most loyal supporters, her. But again, my point is it's not left and right. It's just these are the people that are supporting the government agenda. And she is not aware of that. She fell for her own BS. And it says, there's no such thing as a realignment, she says. We will just need to work extra hard to expose these subversive creatures over the next 4 years. So she's talking to her audience. Now she's essentially weaponizing parts of her audience against the Trump machine, at least the parts that she thinks are not on his side. But there's parts of that are being endorsed by the Republican administration. It's fascinating, isn't it? And this is what partisan stuff does to you. Now it says, imagine believing this nonsense about a realignment. Wake up, it's called being goddamn opportunist. It's like she's trying to conflate the nonpartisan, the way I'm framing this and jamming in the square peg in the round hole at the very end. Well, here's what Nick Fuentes says. You repeatedly attacked me for saying the exact same thing in June to ingratiate yourself with the Trump team. And she really was shamelessly trying to jam herself into that position. And it says, now that they discarded you, which that's what has happened, and you have nothing left to gain, suddenly you have this epiphany. Everybody sees what a craven hack you are. Now, I'm not trying to relish in her downfall, but I do think it's justified. I think she's not an honest person in this conversation, but many of the people who are pushing back on her, I don't think are either. But I just think it's very interesting. And she says, no, I disregarded you because you attacked me and crossed me. Right. It's really sounds very mature. But the point is, as even Khaleesi says, that's a long way of saying you didn't get the job. Interesting. The larger point is just to show you that there are, when you kind of this rabid partisan dynamic has started to eat itself alive. And I think that's an indication of them pulling out shares to get to the end game here. Right. This was the people. I think it goes to a larger game where these people are no longer relevant. But you guys can decide for yourself. In any case, I think people like this, it's clear that even as they use them to get to where they are not people that will be used, because it's embarrassing. When they're standing next to them, people look at the work and they go, well, there are a lot of intelligent people that still support Trump. And they look at this and they go, wow, that's crazy. Now, the bigger point about whether it's Israel or something else is that these choices are objectively bad. And whether you're unless you're a Gorka mainstream government-minded person, people in Trump's supporter circle, I don't think expected big pharma overlaps or lobbyist overlaps or defense overlaps or Israel supporter. Any of these things. So as Mark Placiano says, is it just me? Or does this look like the same swamp that promoted Operation Warp Speed, lockdown in the country, mRNA vaccines for children, masks for children, social distancing, $2.2 trillion printed and passed out in 2020? That's all Trump for you. Obviously continuing with Biden, but the point of the money, CARES Act. But look at this. Just look at these individuals one by one, from J.D. Vance, Susie Wiles, Elise Stefanik, almost every one of them we've already gone over on this show and showed you their aggressive pro-Israel at the expense of American worldview, or that these people are just deep state monsters like Marco Rubio and wildly pro-Israel. But it's just shocking to me. Now, this one, I believe, actually, Howard Lutnick, did he get the Secretary of Commerce position, or I forget which? I think he was removed from something else. I don't know if he's officially there or not. Now, some of these could be up in again, all of them are up in the air. Until we see past January 20th, we don't know for sure. But the truth is, all of these being tapped is alarming. And there's a lot of conservatives find the courage to call this out because it is obviously not what we expect. Now, I briefly had this conversation with Sean earlier today, and this is a clip that popped up after, and I thought it was interesting because I think the same thing. This is largely what I see happening. And I don't mean this as a way that they're intently. I think a lot of people are good intentioned, but also still wrong. But I could be wrong too. The point here is that I think what we're seeing is this willingness, like in all of politics, left and right, willingness to believe just what they say, right? They just float the thing. Here's what we're going to do next. Here's what's going to be. And we've been trained to take that. And even when we engage with it, like, well, those are just words. The point is you later point at more words to back up that those words were correct. We saw this with Trump appointments. We saw this with a lot of stuff. And it's as if the people don't even realize they're doing it. So here's what this guy has to say. Well, Maverick points to this and says, after listening to this, I finally understand why MAGA voted for Trump despite his first term and why they're dumbfounded by Trump's current actions.
Well, economist and historian Dr. Thomas Sowell makes a very interesting point about how humans evaluate political systems. And he says we make the terrific mistake of evaluating them based on their kindly sounding intentions before the fact, rather than on their outcomes after the fact. And he proposes the idea that our world, our politics would look very different if we had to judge each thing that politicians and governments try based on the outcomes instead of the intentions. At the intention stage, it is remarkably easy for smooth politicians to stand up and say kindly sounding things.
Yep. Now think about that. Like, so, and we all see that. Why in the world would we not be gauging them on their actual outcome record? See how easy that is to manipulate? Like, I just think that's so crazy that we choose not to engage. We just go along with what they say they're going to do next, even though we keep showing how they don't seem to ever do what they say they're going to do next. And as usual, they use the game against you. Well, he's an outsider, right? Well, Trump's going to change everything because this is the different one. And this is the most important election of your lifetime. Over and over and over. I get why people fall for it, but I don't know why they continue to with how obvious all this is. Now, we just talked about generally the cabinet picks, but we're going to get into the part that overlaps with Israel. And this is what I think is being clearly seen as this show from November 14th. Conservatives begin to acknowledge Trump's cabinet picks reveal Israel first agenda. And also I talked about Trump is solving, in quotes, government created problems to roll out your Israeli tested AI control grid, quote, solution. Both those have information you should check out. Now here, Carrie Burgess played this clip, another one from Jeffrey Sachs, simply saying the important part out loud, right? What people have been afraid to say, which is that right now, what these politicians are fighting Israel's wars. We need to have the courage to be honest about this.
Believe it or not, weird as it sounds, the U.S. has been fighting Israel's wars for decades. It's been a disaster for the United States, trillions of dollars. By the way, the Israel lobby puts in, $100 million and it gets out trillions on the other side of absolutely horrendous, useless, reckless wars fought on Israel's behalf. Well, Netanyahu, as I said, he doesn't view it as a failure because the U.S. keeps complying. It keeps going along with this. It hasn't stood up and said, you ruined us in 2003. You promised we'd take out Saddam Hussein and all would be well. You told us to take out Bashar al-Assad. We tried to do that, and that was in 2011, and we're 13 years later, and we're still at war. You told us to take out Muammar Gaddafi, and we did that 13 years ago, and now there's still chaos. You have done such destruction, Mr. Netanyahu. Stop it. We don't say that.
No.
So he just keeps doing this. And maybe, and I'm sure that he thinks, with Donald Trump, now I can really do it. Now we'll go to war with Iran. The other side of this was the idea that, yes, we'll do that for Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, but the Saudis will come with us for free. We'll give them some weapon systems, maybe a defense pact, and they'll sign on. That was also the idea of Trump and Biden. No difference between the two in approach. But that's over if it was ever realistic. It's completely over. That's what the Crown Prince's statement today, but he's been making it repeatedly in recent months. It's over. Now, I don't know whether the Trump people understand this or not. Who knows? But they're going to find out. And Netanyahu's going to find out. And all of this is an extraordinarily reckless behavior. And Netanyahu's been one of the most destructive forces in world politics for a long time now. And he's done a lot of damage to the United States. Thank you. And it's time for him to shut up, basically, to stop trying to bring the United States into war. And his latest is to bring it into war with Iran.
Yep, that is the case. And it seems pretty damn obvious. And then you got Trump and Vance and the rest of them, even before being put in position, aggressively ramping up discussions about going to war with Iran. It's not a secret. Now, let's not forget, whether we're talking about media personalities or politicians, that there's obvious influence coming from not, and remember AIPAC, we already did the coverage on this. It is an Israeli government organization that has been shell gamed to make it look like it's something else. It's all very easy to prove coming direct. You could look it up on Wikipedia. And here they are going 97% of AIPAC backed candidates won. Yeah, exactly our point. That's not just about don't give them the money in hopes that they achieve that these as MSNBC even covered, that we've shown you many times, that they are not just supporting them in the classic lobbying sense where they give them money because they generally believe with their policies and then later next year around, if we didn't like what they did, we'll change. No, they are funding on the promise of outcome. And if you don't do what they like, they'll pull their funding in real time. We've seen this during the election process. There's no other group like them. But that's okay, apparently, as long as it's Israel doing it. It's wild, guys, and it's obvious. And our clips in general about the thread that I put together of Donald Trump saying in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different ways that he will support Israel at your expense. Along with every other politician, it seems, but it's very important to see from his mouth. And everyone seems to love to try to make this about, oh, it's out of context. It's not. Look it up for yourself if you think so and put it in the right context for us. The clips are obvious. And I've played them all in full context on the show. Each individual clips give you different examples of why he's saying in a different way, or in some ways the same way at a different time, that he will remove people who hate Israel, right? That he will remove you if you support Palestine. And that ultimately down here, if you burn the flag or you're stupid if you think that's a violation of your rights to put you in jail for doing so. But no matter how much you don't like that, it is a legally protected act. All of these things, whatever your justification or reasoning, are counter to your inherent rights and are going to be used to suppress speech the government disagrees with, which is already happening. Now, from the media perspective of it, right, this is what we already saw. I already played this for you, but it's important to see. This is from BBC, but realize from the dynamic that comes together of not just Trump's administration, but the U.S. government, the media apparatus, and the continued control of information. It's not a one-stop thing. It's not a one-side thing. It is an all-encompassing thing, but it is beginning to fall apart. But if we fall for more partisan sidesteps and shell games, we might just fall back into it.
Israel has a right to defend itself. That was
It says the whistleblower reveals that the BBC has direct instructions to safeguard Israel's image.
The editorial line that was drilled into us, into all of our coverage. It was really an integral part of the editorial stance. To a guest talking about, Israeli airstrikes killing Palestinians in Gaza, that would be the response from our presenters.
Denying access to food is collective punishment, and that we should all be clear in saying that.
Israel will argue, obviously, that it has a right to defend itself.
One of the most egregious examples. Denying food is defending yourselves? They really lost the plot. But the point is, those are mindless followers. They're order takers. They love to act like they have agents, like the Piers Morgans of the world. They're this age, I can say and act and do what I want. Hardly. Just like Tucker exposed after Lee. The point is, they love to pretend like nobody was telling him what to say until later it turned out that there were things he admitted he wasn't allowed to say. Oops. But of course, it's looking back, and now I can say what I want. Sure. I still think we're in the same dynamic. I don't even think we've ever proven that he left Fox for all I know. I think, remember, the point was he was still building this through Twitter and the rest of it while he was still contracted with Fox. Now, I'm not saying that maybe that's ended. I don't know. The point is that I don't know why we pretend to think these people are outside of the system that they literally built an part of. And their narratives seem to be similar or the exact same. I think Fox and CNN and the rest of it are all part of what we're seeing. I think it's quite obvious. And this is exactly the point. If we know that there's this much influence and control, not just on one side or the other, but all of it, we need to ask why people would ever be a part of that. Especially now when the need to demonstrate that we have some new dynamic and you've got people that were just moments ago part of that and take half a step away and go, we're the new media.
People were terrified of using the word genocide in coverage. They still are. You will very rarely see it in any BBC coverage. And if an interviewee says the word genocide?
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
That word is, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
The presenter will almost always panic.
The Labour Party, of all political parties, which has always had a strong peace contingent within it, is now actually supporting genocide.
Okay, we can maybe just avoid that language if that's okay.
Wow, just straight up going, hey, don't say that word. Think about that. How do you not show that as being compromised? Now here's Khaleesi. I've shared this as well, but this is in the same context of even the leading Israeli newspaper, Haaretz. This is an update on this, but remember, this is him speaking, saying why Palestinian Hamas are resistance fighters. This is the editor of the Haaretz newspaper, and why what they're doing in Gaza is genocide. We'll play that first, then we'll play what just happened.
The Netanyahu government doesn't care about imposing a cruel apartheid regime on the Palestinian population. It dismisses the costs of both sides for defending the settlements while fighting the Palestinian freedom fighter that Israel calls terrorists. In a sense, what is taking place now in the occupied territories and in part of Gaza is a second Nakba. A Palestinian state must be established. And the only way to achieve this, I think, is to apply sanctions against Israel, against the leaders who oppose it, and against the settlers.
And of course, that was not okay for Israel, right? You're not allowed to say what you want. Otherwise, when we're a democracy and it's freedom, only democracy in the Middle East, except you can't do and say what you want unless you're a certain color or a certain religion. Like, it's just crazy how obvious these things are not true. So the point is, we love to talk about press freedom in Israel versus the dangerous Middle East, right? Well, guess what? Netanyahu has approved sanctions on their newspaper. Why? For saying what he believes. That's simple as that, guys. Because Haaretz has it's gotten a lot of attention recently more than ever, even though it's one of the most prominent papers in Israel, for saying what nobody wants to say, for proving, because we can prove these things, that what the Western media and Western politicians are doing are absolutely lying. Whether it's Amsterdam, whether it's the ongoing genocide, whether it's the ICC or the blocking of aid, all of them are explicit in their newspaper because you can prove these things. Now, point is, they stand up and say that, or he says his own opinion in this context, and now they're going after the newspaper, because freedom of press, right? Including stopping all government advertising in Haaretz, which that's something that's to their prerogative, but it says ceasing state-funded subscriptions and prohibiting any public institutions from communicating with them. That's the one that matters to me. If the funding comes from the government, that's to be expected. But even though you could make similar arguments for why that is still punitive, the point is that you're literally cutting them off from communication with other newspapers. That is this isn't free speech. Then you don't live in a representative government. You live in an authoritarian apartheid state. The sanctions that are in response to the video below, as we showed before. Here is Haaretz writing this for you. The opportunist resolution to boycott Haaretz, which passed in today's government yesterday without legal review, of course, because, independent judiciary, right, is another step in Netanyahu's journey to dismantle Israeli democracy. Just think how crazy that is. Now, obviously, they're the paper being attacked. So even with this, they'll probably even have more teeth to it. But this is the reality. And Lindsey Graham loves to press the idea that they have an independent judiciary, and that's why the ICC and ICJ have no jurisdiction. Well, they don't, though, because they've been proving this over the years, and their papers have been talking about this. A pretty well-renowned Canadian judge spoke up about this in 2018 and said, too late. Once they take this step, they no longer have specifically an independent judiciary, and then they took that step. See if it pops up. Yeah, look at that. Boom. Perfect one to bring up. See how good my memory is. Yep, look at that, 2018. Without an independent judiciary, Israel's cherished democracy will be at risk, says the Canadian judge. Well, they did what she highlighted as the problem. And that's the point. The people of Israel are the ones also making this case. And so what he's doing, in the interest of just trying to avoid prison, which whether or not October 7th happened, he was just about to go to prison for multiple corruption charges, which that's the whole Bibi's file we just discussed in the last show, which, by the way, was deleted in real time while we're watching it on Twitter, of course. But what it's showing you is the investigation for his crimes. And everybody, including Miriam Adelson, was on the record saying that if she spoke about this, she would be killed. It says, like Putin, Erdogan, Orban, Netanyahu is trying to silence a critical independent newspaper. It's pretty wild. Now, where are we? We're at 3 hours. I'm going to just decide if I want to skip any of this. We'll go. This is actually pretty interesting. It's about 2 minutes. So Richard Medhurst points this out. And this is my point about this, is to overlap the idea of why a lot of these entities are falling for some of this stuff, or why the media specifically, as we were just highlighting, the media influence are, I don't know whether all of them are even aware that they don't know these things, but either way, it doesn't matter because they're wrong. And what he's highlighting here is this shocking, embarrassing lack of information. I mean, even for like an average person, for this journalist talking about Gaza. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about the language barrier, because there's parts of this that you could it makes you feel like she doesn't know what she's talking about, which are really just language barrier gaps, like the word she's looking for from a German. I think she's German speaking originally. Either way, though, it's about what the core message is, and she just does not know what she's talking about when it comes to Israel. And that's, most of them have an entire basis of falsehood when it comes to their conversations of Israel.
Arabic, Muslim, Islamic world is sort of behind the Palestinians, behind Gaza, and supports them. Why are they not helping them? Why are they not taking in the Palestinian refugees? I don't understand it. I don't understand why they can't send humanitarian aid, and I'm sure they have in limited capacity, but why don't they take in the 2 million refugees into their own country?
Now, before he even responds to that, because he doesn't get to this point, but are you really actually suggesting right now that they just have to send some aid? I mean, think about how ridiculously out of touch that is. First of all, because everything goes through Israel. Everything we're talking about, no matter what other, they end up manipulating, processing, taking. Oh, it's been proven so many times over the year. On top of that, post October 7th, they've been denying almost all of it, as has been continually proven. But she doesn't know that because she goes along lying or believes the false narrative that Hamas is stealing it all. The point is, they keep turning it back. I think the numbers were like 9, at least the beginning, like 90% of them were waiting in line, sometimes for days before being turned back because of some arbitrary rule they change every 5 minutes. That's by design. So yes, they were sending aid from all over the place. Wasn't getting to them, though. That's the main point. And then he asked about, why don't they just take them in? Like the shocking lack of understanding or willful disregard, because this is their home.
Send humanitarian aid, and I'm sure they have in limited capacity, but why don't they take in the 2 million refugees into their own country?
Because they're Palestinians and that's their land. They don't want to leave. As a German, you don't want to leave Germany and move into Poland.
Yeah, but I mean,
or move into Czech.
No, well, but that's de facto what happened after the World War.
So first of all, going all the way back to the World War conversation. Well, look, even when you want to go back to 76 years ago, this is even the argument that which is made by even Palestinians to rationalize why a two-state solution makes sense today, giving Israel some of the illegally stolen land, because this has gone on for decades, and there's now more people that have been born and families that have nothing to do with it. The point is, we've moved so far past that original point, even though legally speaking, the right thing to do is give it back to Palestinians. But I think most honest people recognize that doesn't even, because of what they've done. Don't make other Israelis suffer that don't want anything to do with this, right? The point is that clearly we're at a point now where you can't just go move over there because why aren't the Arab countries taking them in? I mean, it's so, I really don't even understand how I was going to say honest, but also intelligent person could make that kind of statement. That they should just move away from where, because this is an inherent point about why, they're somehow just taking advantage of the system. If you don't fully understand, even if you think that somehow it was their fault that they have been displaced from their territory, then you haven't even not even remotely looked into this. You haven't looked into the documents from the origin point, from the UN conversation, or even from Israel themselves, because all of them show you a massive displacement, no matter how you want to frame it for who's at fault. The reality being that they massacred Palestinians and displaced them from their land because the UK said they could, Britain said they could. Simple as that. And the data's all there if you choose to look into it. I hope you will, because today people finally care to look back. But she doesn't know that, or she's lying to you, and that's wild to me.
The frontiers, I don't know, countries get new, how do you say, Grenzen?
Borders.
Borders, thank you. Countries have new borders. and then people get displaced. And I'm not saying this is a nice thing that happens, right? That's not what I'm saying. But how?
But you're saying it's acceptable.
No, I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm just saying that the Palestinians are still considered refugees after being there for 70 years. Why are they still considered refugees? It's not like in Germany or after all the displacement happened after the Second World War.
Because this is their land. Right. In fact, they want their land back. That's what Hamas is all about. If you go back to 1900, there are hardly any Jews in what is today
I understand
Greater
that.
Israel.
Okay, so this is why I'm probably so agnostic.
And the Zionists came in.
Agnostic on what, like she doesn't care enough to, that's just a crazy thing to frame it as.
And they took the land.
But that's not exactly what happened, is it? I mean, there was like a declaration. There was something going on with the Brits, right?
Wow. Yeah, you mean the Balfour Declaration? How are you not even prepped for this? That's so crazy to me. But realize that what he's talking about is, what do you mean, why are they still refugees? Because they've never been allowed to go back to their territory. So that means you don't understand the basic realities of international law when it comes to occupation. It means you don't understand the documents that, even though you seem to know it exists, not enough to look into what it's called or who did it. It's so crazy to me. How is this world we exist in? I think it's because this has been manufactured this way.
Right?
Like manufacturing consent kind of a way.
That gave the Israelis the land, or the Jews.
You think the British had the right to give the
No, that's not what I'm
land?
saying. And this is why I'm so agnostic on this issue, because I am not very sure about certain historical facts.
Wow, you're gonna laugh about that? Gosh, I mean, you can watch more of it in the full thing. As Richard simply says, I mean, there was like a declaration. There was something going on with the Brits, right? He says, Christ, it's like listening to a toddler. The look on his face as she crumbles apart like a soggy biscuit. And these are the people that are informing people about this conversation if they're not looking into it for themselves. It's just wild to me. And then here, like this, these morons like this get away with it because people like her don't know the information. This guy is one of the, is Zionist propagandist right now that's constantly popping up my feed. Who knows why, since I don't follow him. That's things you have to ask yourself. And by the way, it was happening before I was clicking on it and looking at what he had to say. I just started to notice how constantly I was seeing it in my feed before I ever saw him before. How's that supposed to work? Isn't that supposed to be algorithmically what I like? Or is it what Twitter is jumping in front of you? Ask yourself that. Because it's pro-Israel stuff, guys. The point is, he says two-state solution and has a line drawn through British Columbia where left says Palestine, right says Canada. I mean, they're just, it's such an ignorant play on they're trying to confuse everybody. As if they're just saying, just give half of Israel to the Palestinians. It's Palestine that they've taken. Again, most people that are honest are saying, no, let's just create the two-state solution that Israel already agreed to, by the way, and has never followed through with, and allowed the right of return to territory that they have taken from Palestinians. But things like this, people just go, yeah, that doesn't make sense, because they're deliberately creating ignorance for the benefit of Zionism. As Zachary Foster points out, if you're a Palestinian and you live in Shuhuda Street in Hebron, you must climb onto your rooftop to an adjacent street to leave your house. That's a fact. You know why? Because you're not allowed on the street. If you're Jewish, you can come and go as you like. Not so complicated. It's called apartheid. This is not a secret, by the way. This is all over. So it's just so you understand what they're saying. Those streets are for Jews only. Not a joke. Robert has been there, covered this many times. So these are streets in front of their homes. They're Palestinians, and their front door, their street, they're not allowed to walk on. You have to walk. Must climb onto the rooftop to use an adjacent street because they've deemed that street for only Jews. There was another time in which that was happening, and that's, Jim Crow era, where there were whites only water faucets and streets. If you think that's a different thing, you're lying to yourself. Now, it's important to recognize that's not some Jew-only dynamic where that is a Zionist manipulation using Jewish supremacy, just like you see the same thing with Christian Zionists. Now, of course, you can decide whether you think that's the case. I think it's obvious. But it's a trap to fall into that and make it only about one religion that Zionism is simply using. But nonetheless, there is an overlap to that. To make the point, here is the leading Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, and the headline of their report from 2021, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. In that case, it's correct, because it is in in this area, it is Jewish supremacy. But realize there are Zionist infiltration all over the place. But please come to your own conclusions about it. Recognize, though, this is the truth, whether it's contentious or not. Torah Judaism, to make the point that I've made many times, look at this gigantic crowd. Almost every one of them in Orthodox Jewish garb. They say Rabbi Moshe Sternbuck making his entrance at the Satmar anti-Zionism rally, while hundreds of thousands of anti-Zionist Jews greet him. The truth, that the mainstream media ignores. There are hundreds of thousands of anti-Zionist and anti-Israel Jews in the world. See my point? I'm not trying to pretend that's the majority. I'm hoping it's getting there. But just recognize this is not some small, fringe, secretly hating Jews dynamic. These are Orthodox Jews that are calling out a lot of atheist Jews a lot on top of a lot of extremist Zionist Jews are really just Zionists. Because those Zionists will call them not Jews because they don't believe in Zionism. It's all very public, guys. These people get beat up in the streets of Israel all the time. For that example, it's right here. The Zionist state of Israel arrested a Jewish rabbi who was an anti-Israel and anti-Zionist rabbi. Jews who resisted the police trying to kidnap the rabbi from the neighborhood in the car were attacked by police in Israel. The state of Israel is the greatest enemy of the Jews, they write. Israeli police began to forcibly abduct anti-Zionist Jews from their homes. This is today. Look at that. Kicking him on the ground. Look at that. You get the point. All the time. How do you explain that without recognizing that there's an entire group of Jewish organizations in Israel that are not allowed to be part of, that are seen as outside? So if the only idea was you have to be Jewish, well, that's not true. It's about being a Zionist. Daniel outlined here everything that's been wrong with Zionism in 55 seconds.
Absolutely. There is an Israeli position that seems to think that if not by force, then by more force. If not by killing, then by more killing. If not by destruction, then by more destruction. Israel can somehow be hegemonic, secure, and maintain a regime of ethnic supremacy over the Palestinians and a regime of fear over other surrounding states, including Lebanon, rather than stepping back and saying, if we are going to live in peace in this region, we will have to come to terms with the fact that other peoples in this region have rights, will need to have those rights realized and secured if we are going to live in security. But that has become antithetical to actual existing Zionism as practiced by the state of Israel, which is a danger to itself and, of course, to all of those around it.
That's an interesting point, right? So it's kind of like what I'm saying. They out of their own extremist ideology, they've become a threat to themselves because of what they're doing. They're sort of imploding right now. And it's the truth because they're just irrational. And there's actually a point we'll come to in a second about that. I think it's coming up in regard to Ben Gvir versus Netanyahu. And the point being that I think it was about Lebanon. The point is, we'll come up to in a second about the ceasefire possibility that even Ben Gvir is going like, no, we need to take this all the way, and it's just like, well, it's just like they don't so devoid, like, what's the right word for it? Like, because of their extremist ideology, I think they're so up in the clouds about what they think is going to happen without being able to simply recognize their inability without the support of other countries to even put up a fight in this regard. The point is, though, that my point is that Netanyahu at least seems to be feigning towards some kind of a ceasefire in Lebanon because they're not going to win that. Or any of them, I think, which is pretty obvious at this point. So here on that point of Lebanon in general, UNIFIL, by the way, in case you've seen this is a really interesting overlap. Now, this is the UN organization overlap for, Irish. I was going to say, couldn't get the word in my head. The point is that ultimately it's a group that was being attacked by Israel in Lebanon. And they just tried to lazily conflate the UN, UNRWA, Hamas. Well, Hezbollah is the same thing. Like, they just didn't want you to think too hard into it because they just wanted you to justify murdering more people. And it didn't really work. So it seems like they're just kind of not talking about it now, even though they're still bombing buildings and bombing. So basically Gaza moved over to Lebanon without the narrative, without the justification, the lies of the tunnels and the human shield. They're still kind of lazily doing that, but not really forcing it. Nobody's asking questions. No one cares. You're bombing an entire building full of people. Well, they must have had an excuse, because it shows you they're all caught. All of these governments are so blindly in either compromised or in line with Zionism that they don't care. That's what I keep bumping up against. It's like, well, I think the cat's out of the bag. So what do we do now? What is our next step as individuals, the populations that see who our supposed leaders actually are? I don't think violence is the answer, but it damn well needs to be something other than just continuing to point at it and let it happen. Now, here's what's interesting. Not only has that been happening, now they spoke up on today, and they said UNIFIL is seriously concerned by numerous strikes by Israel on the Lebanese armed forces, not Hezbollah, inside the Lebanese territories, despite their declared non-involvement in the ongoing hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel. So this is what gets so interesting about this. I'm not exactly sure where I stand on the full picture. I've heard different opinions from people I respect around the reality of the Lebanese army, which is very different than Hezbollah, which arguably a lot of people say that the Lebanese army is sort of influenced, if not taken over, by United States interests. And that Hezbollah is the group that sort of rose to power in response to that overwhelming influence on their country. So the point is, whatever the full picture is of what they represent, they are standing back and they're not really taking part in this. And yet Israel's bombing them anyway. And that's what they're calling out, going, look, they're bombing the armed Lebanese armed forces. And I think what that has to show you guys is either a complete lack of control or that they're just going after Lebanon, which was always the point. They covet what is Lebanon, just like they covet what is Palestine. And they make that clear when they've already posted for you the new Hebrew names for the settlements they plan to build in northern Lebanon. It's pretty obvious. Or was it southern? I forget. I have to look at which location they're pointing to. The bottom line is they have designs for Lebanese territory. Very, very clearly, and they're publicly talking about it. The Western media and politicians just don't care, don't want you to see it. So I think it's important that we see this. It shows the hand. Sarah Abdallah points out, and this was yesterday, Beirut, right? A major international city populated with civilians. Look at this building. Israel is wiping out entire civilian apartment buildings without justification or restraint. Again, deliberately terrorizing Lebanese families in the middle of the night. Can you imagine this not being discussed? Can you imagine if it was Tel Aviv or Los Angeles? It's just so obvious. This is one of the main reasons why the average person just can't make sense of this. Or doesn't want to. I get it. Because the only way to make sense of it is to recognize the people that you point to as the saviors of the planet, the ones spreading freedom and democracy, are the ones doing the exact opposite. This is insulting. So this is a clip of an Israeli family, all distraught, crying, and upset. Which, whether they know what they're doing or not, it's still heart-wrenching to see a family. But the point is, what they're doing is illegally occupying territory. And this says this is a Tel Aviv resident saying, "This morning I left my beautiful shining house in with a location. When I came back, I didn't have a house anymore. It's hard for me to process this." She writes, "I want to tell everyone, please go find a hiding spot. I never took the siren seriously, never went into shelters. But if I didn't leave today, I would have left for the shelters and I wouldn't have definitely gotten injured or, bottom line, I could have been hurt." Okay. Oops. Oh, come on. There you go. So as she writes here, zero empathy. If you don't want to lose your house, don't live on stolen lands where you pay tax to a genocidal regime. Now, I'm not as explicit as saying, I look, if you born in this location and you end up living in certain, I would argue there's an overlap there where people are just kind of I'm not trying to put a pass on the obvious illegalities of what Israel is as an entirety, or the people that live within it that are actively playing a part in that. My point in this is that I find it crazy that we can frame this in the world as these people are worthy of your compassion because their house was destroyed, and they're framing it as, I don't even know, like the point being, I came back and didn't have to anymore. It's hard to process. Well, yeah. Maybe you should have some compassion and some understanding for what literally every Palestinian is going through right now because of what your government's doing in your name. It's just crazy. The lack of what's the word? It's just there's a word for that. The bottom line is that it's incredible to see this being given focus around the world by U.S. politicians and not the obvious. And recognize that what all this is because of what they're driving into reality. And yes, all of it is on stolen land. Here's a clip from Robert Martin showing you that this goes back long before this. Now, not just because of randomly carpet bombing all of Palestine, but because of places like in the West Bank, where they literally go in there and destroy them to build a swimming pool. So maybe you should have some compassion for these people that have been living like this for 76 years. And don't forget, if you somehow are not capable of tearing down your own house, they charge them for this. They tear down their house, they kick them out of, and then they charge them for the process. And they're called terrorists. Mencho Sint points out, Israeli soldiers desecrate the St. Mima Orthodox Church in southern Lebanon. Yunus Tarawi points out, this is the same point here, the soldiers from the Golani Special Operations Unit, one of the worst, desecrate a Lebanese church. All right, so all the Christians out there that want to support this because you think they're fighting for the same ideas, they are clearly in a context from a Zionist position, have negative energy towards Christians. They're pretty much trained to be that way. I've seen this very public. I find that interesting because it seems to be a contradiction. Now, I'm not saying that every Israeli, I don't think that's the case, or every Jew, but I very clearly see an overlap from the Zionist mindset that is that Christians are meant to be destroyed to bring on the end times. They're basically I've played these clips for you before. Rabbis will talk about this endlessly. It doesn't mean that's what everybody thinks, but there is an element to that in the ideology that drives the current administration. That's what makes it important. Here's CNN from today. Israeli cabinet to vote on Lebanon ceasefire deal after Netanyahu approves in principle. It's just, to me, that sounds exactly like what we've already seen, which means it probably won't happen. But they're voting on a ceasefire for potentially tomorrow. Israeli prime minister said he's approved it in principle, which to me is, again, like everything we've seen so far. Like with the Hamas dynamic, which then they push back at the last second. But it says Lebanese official familiar with the discussion say that they expect it to be announced within 24 hours. So maybe. Now, the overarching point to get through this, because I'm going to wrap this up. The point is, people are arguing that this might actually be the case, and it's more of an indication that Israel's aware that they can't actually fight this battle, right? Whereas in Gaza, they can just keep this going forever as long as their other outside forces support what they're doing. But their own people largely. Oh, and that's the point I was saying earlier. The Ben Gvir is saying it's a big mistake, and we should have historic missed opportunity to eradicate Hezbollah as they're bombing Lebanon, Lebanese army, Lebanese civilians. That's the narrative, right? They know what they're doing. They're the ones dancing in conferences about taking all of Lebanon, so they're not stupid. And that many of the residents deal it as a surrender agreement. A surrender agreement, as you're the one going in and taking their territory. It's crazy. A government is going to sign a very irresponsible agreement, they say. Just like last time. They're saying, if we do this, they'll be right next to our families on the border. It's just if you make them out to be monsters and then you murder them because, you're going to create the monster and really be guided by your irrational belief that they're a monster when in reality you've created this entire situation. It says the U.S.-backed proposal aims to achieve a 60-day cessation of hostilities. So again, a temporary dynamic, which again, even then would be a positive to end of the killing. But I think it'll probably be abused by the powers like Israel, as usually is the case. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Now, here is what Matt Miller had to say in regard to the ending of this is about the ceasefire discussion. And so the point is whether we think in Lebanon it's going to actually come to fruition. So far, everything in front of us gives us the indication that they don't engage with this stuff honestly. So here's Matt Miller kind of trying to fumble through acting like this is not something new. When in reality, it's been the same thing that's been happening. And by the way, that's the image I used today. It's just incredible to me. From Haaretz to CNN to Jacobin, like a intelligence connected thing, or all these, every platform in the world is showing you that Netanyahu is lying to you about ceasefire, that he's systematically foiled it from the beginning. And yet here's Matt Miller gaslighting for the genocide.
Is final until everything is final. We continue to work to try and get an agreement over the line. And we're hopeful we can get one, but we need both of the parties to get to yes.
Okay. Do you have, off the top of your head, an idea of how many times you guys, U.S. officials, have said exactly those words as it regards to Lebanon dating back to September, late September, and as it regards Gaza going back to, almost a couple days or a week or so after the October 7th attacks?
I can tell you we are painfully aware, because this has been an incredibly frustrating process, both getting to a ceasefire and a diplomatic resolution to the conflict in Lebanon, and also the many rounds of negotiations to get a ceasefire in Gaza. There are any number of stages where we have hoped that the parties would get to an agreement. And remember, that's what it requires in these cases. It's not the United States, but the parties to the agreement to say yes. There have been many times when we thought we were going to be getting to yes in both cases, and for various reasons, the parties didn't get there. That said, we believe we are close here, but that's why you heard me come out and say nothing's final until everything is final, because we know we don't have a deal until there's one that has been fully agreed to by both sides.
So why do you think it is, and I'm not asking you to get inside their heads necessarily, but that there are people in this government who are running around on background repeatedly giving overly optimistic assessments of where things stand?
Look, I am always reluctant to speak to the comments that people make on background, because there are any number of government officials with oftentimes with different assessments about the same situation. I will say, speaking to where I believe we are, I've said we're close because I do believe we're close, but that doesn't mean we're going to get there. We need the parties to say yes, and hopefully that'll happen.
Right, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to believe these assessments, because they've been wrong every single time
here's the
so
thing.
far. And I realize that you're wrong until you're right, right? But
so you're right about wrong until you're right, but there's also there's the George Mitchell quote you often hear the secretary referred to about diplomacy being 500 days of failure leading to 1 day of success. That's often how these agreement works. But you should know that typically when we say we're close, we have the caveat that nothing is final until everything is final, and that it takes the parties actually saying yes and getting there.
You have to realize too, those are fair statements. And they're not honest, though, because I can prove to you that's not the case, that they feel that way. But recognize there's been countless examples where they were caught lying about it. Like literally coming out and having Blinken do his little, whatever his role is. I swear he has been chosen to be the most used as the scapegoat for all of these. They put him out and say things that you can immediately prove he knew were false. But like in this case, Hamas better agree because X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not, we could prove that didn't happen. You can prove that as he said that, they knew that Netanyahu was not going to agree. This stuff has all come out. So that's the point behind it all. That I argue, if Matt doesn't know that, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think he does. I think these people are willfully dishonest. I mean, I think that's an easily proven fact, but in this case, they're being willfully dishonest.
I think you've also heard the secretary say that oftentimes the very last stages of an agreement are the most difficult because the hardest issues are left to the end. That, of course, is true. Hopefully we'll get there with an agreement. We're pushing as hard as we can to get a diplomatic resolution that would allow these tens of thousands of people in Lebanon and Israel to return home. But ultimately, that's up to the parties, not to us.
Yep. Except they're actively working with one of those parties to make sure this doesn't happen. Or at the very least, being used by one of those parties to lie for them. You can look at it how you want. But I'll include the links to all of the ones I showed in that picture, right? This is the one I typically show because it's just powerful and it's recent and it comes from Haaretz. How Netanyahu has systematically foiled talks to release hostages from Hamas captivity. You think one of those would be enough with sourced material that shows and proves it to you. But here's another Haaretz article from a U.S. official. Biden realized Netanyahu lied to him about hostage deal. Isn't it amazing how all this can be so public and easily proven, but yet we hear Matt Miller lie to us on a daily basis? That's the kind of unnerving reality that they know you're seeing and are worried about what happens. but they'll rush you into a technocratic panopticon where it won't matter anymore. New evidence reveals Netanyahu's relentless efforts to block hostage deal. That's Haaretz as well. Here's Jerusalem Post. Netanyahu actively sabotaging hostage deal. This is July 16th. Surprise, surprise. Here's CNN. Netanyahu derailed a potential Gaza hostage deal in July. Same one, but different newspaper. This is from Israel Hayom. Gantz accuses Netanyahu of repeatedly blocking hostage deals because he was, and it's easily proven. Jacobin writes, Netanyahu is blocking a hostage deal. Democracy Now! Former Israeli hostage negotiator slams Netanyahu for blocking ceasefire deal, not holding out for a better one or not agreeing to Hamas's deal, blocking it. Having Hamas accept what they put forward and then refusing it on top of that. We've seen that provably 2 times, but it's happened more than that. But I mean, like cases where it was so flagrant on the surface. Those are the 2 where Blinken was doing his rounds and it's up to Hamas. And Hamas called their bluff by, I think, accepting it. And then Netanyahu reeled back and said, never mind. And they all made up a narrative to hide it. It's lazy. Netanyahu, ungrateful, it says, to U.S. Lied about hostage deal, says another U.S. official. Netanyahu doing all he can to block a ceasefire deal. All these are reports you can look into for yourselves. Now, Dan Cohen puts out from, this is Times of Israel. He's saying it's been obvious all along that it was never about the hostages. Now that they've been obliterated, now that they've obliterated Gaza and committed genocide, they're admitting it. Our hostages, this is from an Israeli, it's Times of Israel, but from an Israeli, what was this again? Let's just look it up real quick. I remember looking at this before. One second. It should pop up. Let's see. Times of Israel should pop up. Of course not. Not in this world, right? So not in a world. So you could type in the exact headline, and that's how this is supposed to work, right? Shouldn't it come up with an, oh, there you go. That's funny. Google gives it to you, but Brave doesn't. That's worth noting. So right here. Are the hostages worth it? And this is coming from, where was it? I mean, Times of Israel is why it's important, but I wanted to get to the gist of what he was again. There it is. Jonathan Lipow. Yeah, we referenced him in the past. A professor of economics at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. His views expressed in the article are solely his and so on. Are the hostages worth it? I mean, that's a really crazy deviation from where we were. Meaning the whole point was to save them. And now it's like, well, are they worth it? Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. The human lives that you're pretending to fight for? Yes, objectively. Maybe not to you guys. Ryan Rosbiani points this great clip out from this. I love these. There's I don't know who this person is, some random person on TikTok that just breaks it down for you. You know, the point is that this is, the reason it's showing you things like this, not because they're a definitive source, but because it just shows you that the average people out there see it. It's easy. It's all in front of you. And most people can see through the lies right now. Now the question is what we do to change it.
Palestine doesn't want peace. They've rejected every peace deal. Yeah. Do you know any of the details of the peace deals? Do you know any of the things that Israel offered in exchange for peace? Let me tell you some of them. Palestinians had to agree to give up all of the land under Israeli control, including all of the illegal settlements. They also had to give up a further 8 to 12% of the West Bank, the most fertile land there, in exchange for 1% of the desert near Gaza. So a tiny patch of desert in exchange for the most fertile land that Palestinians have thrived on for generations. Israel also wanted to have permanent control over their airspace, permanent access and rights to all of their water resources, 3 permanent military installations in the West Bank, which was supposed to be Palestine's, so why would they be there? Israeli military presence at all of the Palestinian border crossings. Israel would retain the right to invade Palestine whenever they chose for unspecified emergency reasons.
Right, and this goes back to the larger point of the last time Trump floated the deal of the century that Robert coined as the steal of the century. It was the same idea. Like, you can't pretend that they have something, you know, they're an independent state when you don't give them sovereignty. That you still control their airspace, you still invade, basically invade and then occupy it whenever you want, basically so that you always continue to occupy it. Basically, what's happening now with a little more land. But in this case, it seems like the opposite. So less land and the same thing. We're good? No, it's just anybody who is honestly putting this forward is choosing a side. You don't care about Palestinian the legal reality of the origin point of this. You don't care about a two-state solution. You care about giving Israel what it wants and creating the illusion that somehow this worked out for everyone. It's very easy to see. Watch, Robert has a documentary called The Steal of the Century. It's worth watching.
Palestine would also be demilitarized. Israel would not allow them to have their own military to defend themselves. They would also not be permitted to enter into any international alliance without Israel's approval.
Yeah, independence, right?
Most importantly, Israel refused time and time again to allow the right of return for millions of Palestinian refugees.
And that's one of the most important parts, because that would allow people that were in these locations to go back to their land, which would include areas that Israel has made its own. They'll never allow that. But see, here's the problem: is even coming to a two-state solution today would demand that information be made public in order to rectify it. Whether that means giving them land somewhere else, but it has to be established. It has to be acknowledged. UNRWA has the records and the keys to these homes that still exist. Like this is why they're so desperate to destroy this group. It didn't work entirely. They were still trying to flail about and scream UNRWA is Hamas or the UN is Hamas, but they've lost. And so if they end up being forced into what would be the legal reality that would be just, which they're never going to agree to, I argue, it would force that to come out, at least in some channels. Some people out there that wouldn't have seen it before would come to the realization that they've been always stopping them, and that's why they've always been refugees, that it's always been a design. That's why I don't think they'll ever come to this term.
Living around the world, which is a legal right they have, which the UN has been telling Israel since 1948. At the time of the Camp David peace talks, Israel's foreign minister, who was present at the peace talks, said this was not a missed opportunity for the Palestinians. If I were Palestinian, I also would have rejected the deal. We're all so busy listening and agreeing with Israel's claim that they don't want peace. They reject every peace deal. We've tried. But nobody ever looks at the content of the peace deals, which no sane human with any sort of self-respect would accept.
Yep, except here on TLAV, and you guys watching, because we do, and we'll go through the ins and outs of the actual agreements, the deals, and the points they're making. Well, the one thing I was going to say,
that they don't want peace. We're all so busy with the deal. We're also the Palestinians. If I were Palestinian, I also would have rejected.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. So it's important to point out that in these past deals, it's been exposed through leaked documents and also just Netanyahu's statements and videos that they made sure these things were going to fail, right? They made sure, I think the term they used was poison pills in the agreement. So they knew they would put things in that the Palestinians would never accept, so they could turn around and make it look like they were the ones that refused it. And it's just, and this stuff is easy to prove today. Sort of like funding Hamas in order to keep them divided, things like that. And then turn around and blaming them for it. Here's an article from United Nations. This is from July 17th of this year. Humanitarian situation in Gaza, a moral stain on us all. They're starving people to death while actively fighting off a ceasefire agreement, which would save their people. And you realize while they're starving and stopping aid from going in, they're starving their own people. There's just no way to misunderstand how little they care about everyone. Owen Jones points out that in the process of doing that, while they're starving them and burning aid trucks that was admitted to even in Israeli media, they're allying themselves with ISIS-affiliated groups to do so. Funny how they're willing to contradict everything. They're literally showing that they are everything they accuse them of being in order to kill them. As says, Israel's allying, and we already talked about this briefly in the last show, to ISIS-affiliated criminal gangs to starve Gaza. And here's his post about it. But here's the article we showed you recently. This is from Haaretz from November 11th, 2024. The Israeli army is allowing gangs in Gaza to loot aid trucks and extort protection fees from drivers. Some of the clan's members that they're working with are involved in terrorism, and some are even affiliated with the Islamic State. That's from Haaretz. So much for fighting ISIS. You're literally working with ISIS to fight Hamas, or rather specifically, Palestine. Now, Roberts made the case the ISIS ideology and Hamas are contradictory. That doesn't mean they couldn't find an alliance, but the point is that it's interesting to highlight that the examples that you want to make about that in Gaza are working with the Israeli government. It's probably because it's a construct of the Israeli and U.S. government, but different conversation. Well, not really, but think about how crazy that is. How insulting it is as they call everybody else Nazis and ISIS while they're literally both. Gangs looting Gaza, the Washington Post, Gaza aid, looting Gaza aid, operate in areas under Israeli control. It's everywhere, guys. The evidence and the documentation is everywhere. Let's not forget, from 2015, and, from the origin point, Israel treating al-Qaeda fighters wounded in Syria. This is, actually, I'll grab this for you as well. James Corbett's important documentary, or rather our watch along with all 3 parts. Worth watching. The links to just the docs are in here as well. False Flags, a secret history of Al-Qaeda. The reality is, once you watch this, you won't be able to unsee the facts. All of it has source material you can look into for yourself. So if you want, just skip the video, look at the source material, prove it to yourself, and then watch it. To recognize that the facts are there, no matter what. The evidence is undeniable. ISIS, Al-Qaeda first, into ISIS. These are proxy elements of the very powers pretending to fight these things in the world. Until you can rectify that, reconcile, come to terms with that, you'll always be misinformed. Now, last one main point is the ICC dynamic. This is actually pretty crazy to me, and it just shows you how flimsy this whole thing is. Sort of like the Holocaust survivors that were, more than one, by the way, that were standing alongside the protesters. How many times we've shown you that, right? Standing up and saying, we're standing with these people because they're fighting basically the current reality of a Holocaust, which is what Israel is super upset and afraid to let, you say that, you're a racist, right? A ICC judge apparently is also a Holocaust survivor. And I just find that crazy that we live in a world now where this is somehow, again, doesn't this make the point about Zionism versus Judaism? That you can literally be a Holocaust survivor, and if you dare to call out Israel or Zionism, you're suddenly no longer a Jew, even if you're a Holocaust survivor. Here's the clip from the guy from the protest.
A Holocaust survivor. My message to the brave student protesters in America is just keep doing it. Don't give up. We are doing exactly the same. And in the long term, we are going to prevail.
Now, he's alongside many others at these and plenty of others. And even Zionists online will call them an anti-Semite. It's just disgusting. This is one of the 6 judges who examined the evidence against Netanyahu and Gallant. He decided the ICC should issue the arrest warrants. His name is Theodore Meron. He's a Holocaust survivor and a former Israeli ambassador to Canada. He knows the Holocaust when he sees it. Here's the link. You can read it for yourself from the Jewish Voice for Labor. It's pretty crazy, isn't it? Now, I'm going to skip over this just for time in general, but I just wanted to reiterate this. We just talked about it in the last show. Netanyahu brought the ICC ruling on himself, Haaretz writes, and now he's whining about anti-Semitism. That's the Israeli newspaper. Now, what I wanted to quickly go over is just the overlapping points. Obviously, they're telling you it's justified, but they make a bunch of other points in this that highlights things that they say in passing that we deny in this country. Things like burning aid trucks. Right here. Right? Saying, when the national security minister encourages militias to set fire to aid trucks, the responsibility falls on the prime minister. That's like a passing point that we would screech about this guy. It's fake news. No, it's very real, and there's videos of it. But they just casually acknowledge this stuff. Or many others that are in this, that they're lying to you guys. Read them for yourself. It's very important stuff. Now, Mohammed Shihana points out that they are saying the quiet part out loud on the Washington Post. The ICC is meant to only go after brown and black people, which is exactly what the Khan said publicly, that they told him that. This court was designed to go after Russia and Africa. It's like these people are inherently disgusting. And that's what it's saying. ICC is needed to help resolve in Russia, Sudan, Myanmar. No, it's meant to go after people that are committing international crimes under international law. That's what it's for. This is Arnaud Bertrand pointing out that Biden called Macron to tell him that Netanyahu, quote, had a right to be angry at France for suggesting that it would go along with the ICC. It's just absolutely comical. I mean, the idea that rules-based order, except when the rules-based order goes against what we want. It's just sad. Ryan Rusbiani pointing out that, so a group that is pushing back on the ICC and international law, Here's a reason, one of many reasons why. Maybe because Israel's the only country in the world that has a children's military prison. Maybe that's worth reflecting on.
After interrogation, children are brought here for trial. Ofer
Mainstream corporate media for you, by the way.
Military prison near Jerusalem. The army would not let Four Corners film inside.
I've been behind these walls 3 times. I saw children shuffling across the courtyard, handcuffed and shackled. Some hearings lasted 60 seconds. I saw one boy shout the name of his prison so his mother would know where he was being held. I saw the judge convict some children without even once looking at them. Through it all, what I saw was a conveyor belt of convicted children.
I think, and the rate of conviction is like 99%. It's obscene.
Perhaps to give you some indication of how efficient, from a military perspective, this system is. According to the military court's own records, their annual report, the courts have a conviction rate of around 99.74%.
Typically, a Palestinian boy convicted of throwing stones will be sentenced to about 3 months imprisonment. The United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, last year released a scathing report on Israel's system. It found that Palestinian children had been threatened with death, physical violence, solitary confinement, and sexual assault against themselves or a family member.
The report found that ill treatment was widespread, systematic, and institutionalized throughout the system, from the moment that the child was arrested right up until the sentencing process.
Last month, under pressure from human rights groups, Israel stopped the long-standing practice of keeping children overnight in outdoor cages. Children had been kept freezing in the cages during snowstorms.
It's just crazy. That's an older documentary, well before October 7th. The reality is, guys, this has been something that's been going on for 76 years, and in increasingly, in varying degrees of increasing over the years. Here, just to make sure it's clear, this wasn't October 7th forward. As we've shown many times, this is from September 2023. 2023 marks the deadliest year on record for children in the West Bank, even. But let's keep lying to ourselves about why, this all started because they were attacked. Tiberius points out something I think is important to consider. You got 2 pictures in front of you. He quotes George Orwell. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. The top image is of a pristine Tel Aviv, the terrorized. The bottom is a completely, utterly destroyed Gaza, the terrorist. Worth considering. And of course, in the context of breaking international law, things like bombing hospitals and murdering children and killing journalists, those used to be violations. Apparently, in the world of Israel impunity, or the awareness of it, just nobody cares anymore, at least in the context of the corporate media, mainstream alternative media dynamic. Here's Sarah Abdallah from Today, showing you that they are murdering journalists now in Lebanon with impunity.
Watch has found an Israeli strike on southern Lebanon that killed 3 journalists last month was most likely deliberate and a war crime. It says Israel's forces used US-made arms in the attack on the town of Hasbaya.
Don't forget, guys, we reported on a journalist being killed in Lebanon, a Reuters journalist, in the first couple of weeks of this. This is not new. The fact that they're getting away with this is incredible, at least for now. Mohammed Safa points out the number of journalists killed in wars. In Vietnam, 63 journalists killed in 20 years. World War II, 67 journalists killed in 7 years. Gaza and Lebanon, 193 journalists in 1 year. This violates Article 79 of Additional Protocol Geneva Conventions, Protocol 1 Geneva Conventions, but a national law clearly doesn't apply to Israel. Now, whether you want to go into the argument that they're secretly Hamas, first of all, that has to be verified and proven. Even if you want to argue that's the case, that should be something that's easy to demonstrate. But on top of that, there is clear lines that need to be crossed for that to be, not that they're part of Hamas. They can literally be a member of Hamas and still be protected as a journalist unless they are acting while a journalist in other ways. But even then, we can prove that's not happening. They've been caught saying people are Hamas when you can prove that there's not even that they knew that that's not the case, or that they just murdered an entire group of people and claimed they got a bad guy that didn't even end up being there. The Guardian. An investigation by The Guardian can reveal Israel has used U.S. munitions to kill 3 journalists, to target and kill 3 journalists in Lebanon. It's coming out everywhere, guys. They can't hide from this as much as they seem to be allowed to get away with it. Ryan points out the 188 journalists, and this is from Gaza, in 14 months. Here are their pictures. Here are their names. In what other context does that happen? Right? If they really want you to believe these are all terrorists, there's your data for you. In typical circumstances where you get the other side of the narrative, you rarely get this kind of information, where they try to hide it all from you and tell you to trust the narrative. Intelligence says, there you go. They're murdering people right in front of you. And here's another doctor. She compares this to The Onion. Israel warns Gaza still harboring hundreds of doctors. That's October 2023. Well, today, November 23rd, 2024, another doctor has been targeted by Israel at the Kamal Adwan Hospital. Dr. Hussam has been working tirelessly for the past year under horrific conditions. One after another, they're targeting everybody that's helping Palestinians. And here's the thread of all the doctors standing up and telling you what they're seeing. How many of them, this doctor being one that, according to Sky News, was likely raped to death based on the forensic information they have. I just don't understand how this is not more, how it's still happening. Lastly, I'll leave you with this clip from another journalist on the ground saying she was literally embedded with these people while they were attacked, killing medics. The strikes are deliberately targeting medics vital to saving lives. So we'll end with this. I'll leave you with this clip on the way out. Stand up. Stand up and do something. There's people's lives on the line, and your livelihood, your safety, your security, your country, whatever you believe you're fighting for, it's all pretty much on the line. And that's not hyperbolic. I think it's obvious. Whether that leads to world war or not, I think it's obvious that we are watching something slowly encroach and take further ground inside of what we believe is ours. And I mean, that's kind of metaphorical, talking about our rights. But in this case, literally the country itself, you could argue, is part of this. The technocratic side of it, the Israeli side of it, we're watching things shift in rapid ways. And I think people are blinding themselves to it because of their hope that Trump is what they want him to be. I share your hope, but we cannot allow that to blind us to what's really happening in front of us. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. We're going to be coming up in the next month. I have more going to be just beginning to kick off around these legal proceedings. I don't know how far it will go, but ultimately this might be seeing more of my time. But at the same time, the costs that are going to come along with this are going to be ridiculous. I'm already starting to kind of tighten the belt when it comes to the writings and the article work, which just kills me because it's so important to hear what Robert and Derek and everybody else has to say, because they, I think, have been more impactful in the conversation, whether it's been allowed to be seen or not, than most people out there. The point, though, is that the more you can support us, the more you can step up and help this platform. And most importantly, is just getting the work out there to more people to see it who might be willing to support us in other ways. But we are in desperate need of your support in so many ways. I'm never going to stop doing this, whether it's in my room on a cell phone, but to continue doing it in the way that I think will have the most impact, your support is needed. If you believe in this platform, if you believe in what we're trying to do, let us know. I love you all. Thank you for your ongoing support. I just can't express to you how much it means to me that we've built what we have together, because you are just as much a part of this as I am. This wouldn't exist without you. So thank you for being here. I love you all, as always. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
We're in Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley at the location where an Israeli strike killed the director of the Dar al-Amal hospital, Ali Alam, alongside 6 others yesterday at 6 p.m. They were sitting over here enjoying the evening when the missile struck. You can see some bereaved relatives over there trying to cope with the loss, which is felt among the people of Baalbek. And this comes just days after another Israeli strike targeted the civil defense, killing more than a dozen people. There's a feeling here that these strikes are not accidents, that they're very much intentional, aimed at institutions and people like Ali Alam, who are critical for sustaining civilian life, with the objective of depopulating this region.